On a quiet spring night in 2015, the town of Somerville, South Carolina, was shaken by a disappearance that would soon unravel into one of its darkest tragedies. Ashley Pegram, a 28-year-old single mother of 3, disappeared after meeting a stranger online. This is not just the story of Ashley's final hours, it is a story of betrayal, of a family's desperate search for truth. It was spring 2015 in the quiet town of Somerville, near Charleston. Ashley, a hard-working single mom raising 3 young children, had connected with someone on the app Meet Me. They had also been messaging on Kik for about a month before deciding to meet in person. On the evening of the 3rd of April, 2015, around 9:30 p.m., Edward picked her up from her home in a Hyundai Sonata. The next morning, Ashley's family received a message claiming she had been dropped off at a gas station because she was too drunk. But that story didn't make sense. Ashley wasn't the type to disappear without checking in, especially with her kids waiting at home. Panicked, her family immediately reported her missing, leading to a community search and an urgent police investigation. To truly understand why Ashley's disappearance struck such a deep chord, we need to look at the woman behind the headlines. Ashley Pegram grew up in Somerville, South Carolina, in a close-knit family that valued togetherness. She shared a modest home with her mother and sister, Brandy Chance, sometimes even sharing one phone for the whole household. At just 28 years old, Ashley was already a devoted mother of 3. Friends and family described her as a loving, playful parent, the kind of mum who turned chores into games and always put her kids first. But life hadn't been easy. Years earlier, the father of her sons had passed away, leaving her to grapple with grief. At times, she leaned on alcohol to cope with the pain, though her mother made sure those struggles never touched the children. That April evening, Ashley told her family she was heading out for a casual night, just a drink or two. She wore jeans, a gray sweater, and new shoes, keeping it simple. When Edward Bonilla, 30, the man she had been talking to, arrived in his Sonata, he didn't come to the door or introduce himself. He just waited in the car, which struck her family as odd. Still, Ashley got in, and the two drove off. They ended up at a bonfire hosted by Edward's brother. It was a casual gathering. People around a fire, others playing ping pong in the garage. Ashley seemed relaxed, chatting with people she'd never met before. One attendee later recalled that Ashley was friendly and easy to talk to. She had a couple of beers from the 6-pack she'd brought, but showed no signs of intoxication. She was steady, engaged, and in control. By about 11:45 p.m., Edward decided it was time to leave. Ashley wasn't in a hurry. She still had beer left and seemed to want to stay, but he took the rest of her 6-pack and ushered her out. Just after midnight on April 5th, they pulled into a gas station on College Park Road. Security cameras captured Ashley going inside at 12:04 a.m., using the restroom, and leaving at 12:11 a.m. She appeared fine, calm, and composed. She got back into the Sonata, and the two drove off together. After that, according to Edward's later account, things got heated in the car. He said Ashley started yelling, accusing him of stealing her mum's phone. Even though she hadn't taken the family phone with her that night, he claimed she became so upset that she wandered out near a mobile home park, which was only about 1.5 miles from her house. He said he let her out there to use the bathroom again and then drove off after the argument, assuming she would walk home. But as the hours passed and Ashley never returned, it became clear something far more sinister had happened that night. Ashley's house was silent that night. Her usual, "Mom, I'm home," never came. At 3:29 a.m., Edward sent a Kik message to the family phone, saying he hoped Ashley was okay. He claimed he left her at a gas station because she was too drunk. However, this didn't match what others saw at the bonfire, where Ashley didn't seem very intoxicated. By morning on the 4th of April, the silence became unbearable. Ashley's mother noticed she hadn't returned, so she checked the phone and saw Edward's message. Her sister, Brandy, immediately began calling his number over and over. When Edward finally called back, his story shifted. Now he claimed he'd dropped Ashley near a mobile home park. That sudden change sent alarm bells ringing. Brandy and her mother rushed out, walking the dark roadside near the park, peering into ditches, terrified she might have fallen or been struck by a car. They found nothing. Still, Brandy couldn't shake the sinking feeling in her chest. As hours passed with no sign of Ashley, panic grew. The family reached out to friends, spreading word of her disappearance. Everyone knew Ashley would never abandon her children. By that evening, her mother called dispatch to file a missing persons report. She laid out the details of the date, the late-night messages, and just how out of character this was. With those early red flags, the Dorchester County Sheriff's Office quickly took action. Detective Sergeant Martin was assigned on the 7th of April. Just days after Ashley was last seen, he started where most cases begin. With the people closest to her, Brandy recounted everything: the shared family phone Ashley had left behind, the 3:29 a.m. kick message, and Edward's inconsistent stories. Martin quickly saw that this wasn't a case of someone walking away from their life. Ashley had no history of disappearing. She was a devoted mother, with no enemies, no bitter disputes. Her world revolved around her kids. Friends and neighbors echoed the same picture. Ashley was lively, photogenic, the kind of person who lit up family gatherings. No one recalled seeing strange cars beyond Edward's Sonata that night, nor hearing arguments near the house. Still, some hinted at her vulnerability, saying grief sometimes led her into impulsive choices. One friend remembered Ashley was depressed, making poor decisions and things like that because of it. Neighbors joined the family in combing ditches and wooded lots, but the searches came up empty. Police pushed flyers, took in tips, and monitored social media, but no breakthrough came. Then came Edward. On the 8th of April, at 6:00 p.m., he walked into the sheriff's office for an interview. At first, he seemed cooperative. He outlined his story, picking Ashley up, going to the bonfire, her drinking, the stop at the gas station, the argument about a stolen phone, and finally dropping her near the mobile home park. He even pointed to a scuff mark on his car's front right quarter panel, claiming Ashley had kicked it in anger. But Martin's eyes caught a detail Edward didn't expect. The mark wasn't shaped like a normal kick. It was narrow at the bottom and wider at the top, exactly the kind of impression you'd see if someone had been on their back, kicking upward. Edward also slipped in small lies, like claiming he was unemployed due to an ankle injury, that raised even more suspicion. Investigators moved fast to test his story. They pulled security footage from the gas station on College Park Road. The video confirmed the timeline: the Sonata pulling in at 12:04 a.m., Ashley stepping out, calm and steady, using the restroom and getting back into the car at 12:11 p.m. She wasn't stumbling. She wasn't distressed. The footage shattered Edward's claim that she was too drunk to stand. Then, investigators turned their attention to the mobile home park. Edward swore he'd dropped Ashley there, but nearby surveillance told a different story. A garage at the intersection had cameras pointed directly at the road. When detectives reviewed the tapes, no Hyundai Sonata appeared during the time frame Edward described. His alibi collapsed on the spot. Why insist he'd been there if the cameras proved otherwise? Detectives circled back to the bonfire, re-interviewing attendees. Edward's brother's girlfriend, who had known the family for years, gave a clear impression. Ashley arrived around 9:30 p.m. Friendly, steady, and in no way stumbling drunk. In fact, Ashley wanted to stay longer, but Edward abruptly ended the night, even scooping up the beers she'd brought. Other guests echoed the same. Ashley was relaxed, social, enjoying herself. No aggression. This painted a starkly different picture from Edward's story of a drunk, unruly woman. Then came a breakthrough from an unexpected source. A tip from Edward's ex-girlfriend revealed he wasn't unemployed at all. He worked at cobble flooring and had access to company vans. When Detective Martin confronted him at the job site, Edward fumbled, claiming he had just started a few days ago. His boss quickly corrected him, saying Edward has been working there for 8 months. The lie raised even more questions. Why conceal his work? What was he hiding about those vans? Investigators acted fast. Edward's boss mentioned that he had seen Edward heading to the company van as if to retrieve something. Martin moved quickly, securing the Ford Econoline before Edward could touch it. Inside, the sight was chilling. Red stains streaked the walls, ceiling, and scattered items. A dented polyurethane missing its handle, tested positive for blood. Detectives collected Ashley's DNA standards, a toothbrush, a hairbrush, and sent everything to the lab. Within days, results came back. The blood in the van was Ashley's. The spatter patterns suggested something far worse, that she had suffered repetitive force while still alive. Attention then shifted to the Sonata. With Edward's mother's cooperation, investigators located it in North Charleston and seized it for processing. No obvious blood was found, but the suspicious shoe print on the car's panel was preserved. Step by step, Edward's carefully spun story was unraveling. Digital forensics made the noose even tighter. Cell phone records showed Edward's device pinging towers far from his normal routes. On the 4th of April, between 6:44 a.m. and 7:12 a.m. His phone was in Harleyville. Hours later, pings placed him back near work. What was he doing there? Search efforts widened. Authorities scoured reservoirs near Edward's apartment complex, even calling in the Department of Natural Resources to help scan the alligator-infested waters by boat and air. But no trace of Ashley surfaced. Still, investigators knew the case was building. By mid-April, the evidence was overwhelming: blood in the van, phone pings pointing to suspicious travel, witnesses contradicting Edward's story, and his lies about even the simplest details. On the 15th of April, 2015, detectives decided enough was enough. They moved to arrest Edward Bonilla for obstruction of justice, citing his repeated deceptions. When officers arrived at his apartment complex, the scene only deepened their suspicions. Edward was dragging a suitcase toward a rental SUV, seemingly preparing to vanish. The timing was telling. He was taken into custody without resistance. What began as a missing persons case was now a homicide investigation, with Edward squarely in the spotlight. To understand Edward Bonilla, investigators dug into his background. Born and raised in Dorchester County, he attended local schools, where classmates remembered him as someone who blended in with the crowd. He had a brother, Anthony, and the family often gathered for casual get-togethers, like the bonfire Ashley attended that night. Outwardly, Edward seemed ordinary, with a steady job and a long-term girlfriend. But text records revealed another side. While making plans with his partner about dinner and intimacy, he was also messaging Ashley. It painted the picture of a man leading a double life, showing little concern for loyalty or honesty. Professionally, Edward had worked at cobble flooring for 8 months, installing flooring and driving company vans. His criminal record was minimal. No serious charges that might have raised alarms. but people who knew him later described a pattern of disregard toward women. When first questioned after his arrest, Edward stuck to the story he'd told before. He repeated the detail about her supposedly accusing him of stealing her mother's phone and kicking his car in anger. But detectives pressed him about the inconsistencies, particularly the surveillance footage showing no Sonata near the mobile home park. As the weeks passed and evidence like Ashley's blood in the van was presented, his answers grew evasive. Though he never confessed outright during interrogations, the walls were closing in. By early May, the case took a decisive turn. On May 5, 2015, based on the forensic results and the mounting circumstantial evidence, Edward Bonilla's charges were upgraded to murder. Investigators didn't believe the crime was premeditated. Instead, they theorized it stemmed from a confrontation that escalated into violence. His pattern of disrespect toward women, combined with Ashley's resistance that night, suggested the encounter spiraled out of control. Just 3 days later, on May 8, 2015, during a private consultation with his attorney, Edward finally broke. He revealed the location of Ashley's body, a remote, wooded tract off Brown Road near Harleyville, the same area where his phone had pinged weeks earlier. Authorities launched a search immediately on May 9, 2015. Search teams, including volunteers and dogs, scoured the site. Deep in the woods, far from any main road, they discovered Ashley's remains. She had been there for more than 5 weeks, lying face down in the mud. Her body was naked except for a red bra, partly wrapped around her neck. Nearby lay a black garment. Her eyeglasses, later matched to family photos, confirmed her identity. Black electrical tape was still looped around her right wrist and neck. Clear evidence of restraint. The autopsy ruled her death a homicide by violence. Discolorations on her scalp were consistent with repeated blunt force trauma. Even after the discovery, Edward's story shifted only slightly. He suggested that restraint during the altercation had gone wrong, but he stopped short of taking full responsibility. By then, however, the evidence spoke louder than his words. The investigation had moved into its next phase, preparing for trial. The trial began on August 8, 2016, in Dorchester County and lasted 4 days. The prosecution argued that Edward intentionally killed Ashley, presenting a timeline of lies and physical proof. They showed gas station surveillance footage of Ashley appearing sober, which contradicted Edward's claim that she was extremely drunk. Phone records and cell tower data showed Edward was in remote locations like Harleyville soon after Ashley disappeared. Near where her body was eventually discovered, experts testified that bloodstains on Edward's work truck showed repeated blunt force trauma, consistent with autopsy results. The prosecution also pointed out that Ashley had a muscle relaxant called cyclohexanone in her system, which she had no reason to take, suggesting she was drugged without her knowledge. Furthermore, the prosecution emphasized that Edward's story changed multiple times, including where he claimed to have left Ashley. They also highlighted his lies about his job and his attempt to escape before being arrested. The prosecution concluded that his actions were not accidental, but a deliberate cover-up of a crime. The defense argued that Ashley's death was a tragic accident caused by a misunderstanding. Edward testified that Ashley became angry after they stopped at a gas station, accusing him of stealing and getting out of the car. He said he accidentally ran her over while backing up. Then, to stop her from attacking him, he held her in what he described as a bear hug, possibly a chokehold. He didn't realize she had stopped breathing until it was too late. Edward admitted he panicked. He put Ashley in the trunk of the Sonata temporarily, then left her on a frontage road. Later, he used his work van to move her body and bury her in a shallow grave. Using a board as a shovel, The defense pointed out that Edward had no serious criminal record. They suggested that the blood evidence was consistent with an accidental struggle, not a deliberate murder. They asked the jury to consider lesser charges, such as involuntary manslaughter, arguing that it was a brief loss of control without any intention to kill Ashley. After deliberating, a jury found Edward Bonilla guilty of murder on August 11, 2016. The judge described the handling and disposal of the body as particularly cruel and sentenced Edward to life in prison without parole. He appealed the conviction in 2019, arguing issues with evidence, admission, and trial conduct, but the South Carolina Court of Appeals upheld the decision, affirming the life sentence. Francesca Brandoli and Christian Cavalletti met in Italy in 1998 when they were both 25 years old. Francesca lived in Reggio Emilia, while Christian lived nearby. They first connected over the phone, which was a common practice at the time since chat rooms and dating sites had not yet become popular. People often filled out personal questionnaires, and potential partners were matched based on their responses. Francesca and Christian felt an instant connection. Their relationship quickly evolved from regular phone calls to in-person meetings, and soon they couldn't imagine being apart. Francesca moved to Vilova to be closer to Christian. At the time, Christian was focused on advancing his career, running a small knitwear shop while maintaining close ties with his family. He was active, energetic, and passionate about motorbikes, a hobby that Francesca also enjoyed. She eagerly became a part of his life, and they often went on motorcycle rides, spending time with friends and family. They married on the 19th of September, the same year they met. After their wedding, Francesca began working at Christian's shop, and their lives became closely intertwined. Francesca and Christian spent nearly all their time together, ignoring advice from others to give each other occasional space. Both believed their close bond was unshakable. Their family and friends saw them as a perfect match, deeply connected on every level. However, life brought unexpected challenges for Francesca and Christian. They both wanted a family, but had different timelines. Francesca was eager to have a child, while Christian preferred to delay parenthood to focus on building a stable foundation for their future. He worried about providing for their family if children came too soon. In 2001, their first child, David, was born, bringing joy but also significant changes to their routine. Francesca devoted herself to raising their son, while Christian immersed himself in work. Even though they have to make many adjustments, they still strive to balance their lives. 2 years later, in 2003, they welcomed their second son, Lorenzo. However, after Lorenzo's birth, their relationship began to shift. Francesca confided in friends and family that she felt increasingly distant from Christian. Similarly, Christian shared with his friends that he felt uncomfortable at home and sensed a growing disconnect. He believed Francesca was struggling with severe postpartum depression, which led to frequent conflicts. These tensions strained their once harmonious relationship, causing them to drift apart. Francesca's emotional state worsened. She felt abandoned and unloved, as though Christian no longer cared for her. Desperate to fill the emotional void, she considered seeking help from a family counselor, but nothing seemed to improve their situation. Resentment toward her husband grew, and Francesca decided to explore other ways to feel valued. She registered on a dating site and, by chance, met a man named Davide Ravarelli. He was a 34 years old, communications and advertising professional, university lecturer, and a charismatic, athletic man. Francesca was immediately drawn to him. Initially, Francesca saw Davide as a distraction from her unhappiness, a way to escape her routine and feel appreciated again. However, as their connection deepened, she began to fear that she couldn't return to her life with Christian. Over time, She came to accept that she wanted to leave her marriage and start anew with Davide. Their emotional affair reignited feelings in Francesca that she thought had long faded. With Davide, she felt desired and alive again. Their online connection transformed into a passionate relationship. The situation was complicated, though not only was Francesca still married with children, but Davide also had a wife and kids of his own. David was going through a similar marital crisis, feeling trapped in his relationship with no apparent way out. His affair with Francesca became the catalyst for making drastic changes in his life. After a few months of their relationship, they decided to leave their families to be together officially. For Francesca, this meant making the heartbreaking decision to leave not only her husband, but also her 2 sons. Early in her new relationship, she began fighting for full custody of her children. However, the court ruled that her sons would remain with their father, Christian. The court's decision devastated Francesca, who had hoped to remain an integral part of her children's lives. Feeling hurt and angered by Francesca's betrayal, Christian refused to allow her any contact with their sons, further deepening her emotional turmoil. During this time, she discovered she was pregnant with David's child. Although this complicated matters, Davide supported her. Still, Francesca was unable to repair her relationship with her sons or gain access to them. Christian, feeling abandoned and betrayed, strictly adhered to the court's ruling and refused any compromises regarding the custody arrangement. He prevented Francesca from spending more time with the children, citing her betrayal as justification. Despite having limited rights for scheduled visits, Francesca's attempts to negotiate always ended in failure. Frustrated and unable to communicate with Christian, she often confided in Davide, occasionally exaggerating Christian's behavior out of resentment. Over time, Davide began to see Christian as a major obstacle in Francesca's life. Francesca's resentment grew, rooted in her feelings of abandonment during her marriage. She believed that she didn't deserve the treatment she had endured, and her frustration gradually turned into an obsession. One day, following yet another unsuccessful attempt to gain more access to her children, Francesca returned home, enraged. Christian had once again denied her requests, arguing that her infidelity could harm her case in court. The tension between them continued to escalate daily. November 30, 2006, turned out to be a pivotal and tragic day. A custody hearing was approaching, and the ongoing conflict persisted. While Christian lived with his sons, Francesca remained determined to fight for greater access. That evening, Christian's neighbor noticed something unusual. Late at night, he heard strange noises and saw Christian approaching his gate to meet 2 figures standing outside. Despite the inappropriate timing, Christian calmly chatted with them and invited them into his home. Moments later, as Christian walked toward his house, the 2 individuals suddenly attacked him. Realizing the severity of the situation, the neighbor rushed outside, managing to scare off the attackers. However, by then, it was too late. Christian lay on the ground in a pool of blood at 11:25 p.m. Emergency services received a call from the distraught neighbor, reporting that Christian had been violently attacked. Though still alive when authorities arrived, Christian's condition was critical. His injuries were so severe that even immediate medical treatment could not save him. It was clear he had been brutally assaulted. Christian had suffered approximately 20 stab wounds and 9 blows, primarily to his head. His skull was shattered, and the stab wounds to his stomach and neck were catastrophic. Numerous injuries could have been fatal, including heavy blows to his head that caused massive brain hemorrhaging and stab wounds that severed critical arteries. Defensive wounds on Christian's hands indicated that he had fought desperately against his attackers and might have injured them in the struggle. Forensic investigators examined the crime scene, finding evidence near the gate, as well as a long trail of blood leading to where Christian's body was discovered near the entrance to the house. It appears that after being attacked, he tried to run home but died near the entrance due to his severe injuries. There were no signs of forced entry, suggesting that Christian likely let his attackers into his home willingly. This shows that he knows and trusts them enough to let them into his house, even at night. A neighbor served as a key witness, though he hadn't seen the attackers' faces. However, he was able to provide basic descriptions that helped guide the authorities. Using this information, the police began investigating Christian's inner circle. Christian was generally known as a decent man who had no enemies or major conflicts in his life. However, the biggest event he faced was the tense divorce and subsequent custody battle. Determined not to lose custody of his sons to his ex-wife Francesca, who had moved in with her new partner Davide, Christian fought hard in court. Due to the emotionally charged dynamics of this love triangle, the Carabinieri quickly identified Francesca and Davide as primary suspects. Christian had often complained about Francesca during their marriage, frequently accusing her of infidelity. His friends and family were well aware of the bitter custody fight, which had ultimately ended in Christian's favor after Francesca left the family for another man, Davide. This outcome created a strong motive for Francesca to seek revenge. Friends and family also recall Francesca's interactions with Christian, leaving her confused and uncomfortable, seemingly adding to her animosity towards him. Despite these circumstances, both Francesca and Davide vehemently denied any involvement in the murder. Background checks revealed that neither of them had a criminal record, and both appeared to be law-abiding citizens on the surface. However, the evidence suggested the attack had been carefully premeditated, making it difficult to assign responsibility definitively. The investigation faced significant challenges due to a lack of concrete evidence, such as a murder weapon or items directly linked to the attackers. Authorities believed the perpetrators had destroyed anything incriminating in an effort to obtain further evidence. Detectives decided to wiretap Francesca and Davide's conversations, hoping the surveillance would reveal new information or even a confession. People suspected of such crimes often end up discussing their actions over time. However, Francesca and Davide seemed aware that they were under surveillance and deliberately avoided mentioning Christian's death, considering it a taboo subject. Their excessive caution led the detectives to suspect that they were trying to avoid detection. Sometime later, Francesca and Davide rented a car, apparently convinced their own vehicles were bugged. Believing the new car was free of monitoring devices, they began speaking more openly. What they didn't realize, however, was that their mobile phones were also being tapped, allowing detectives to record everything. During these private conversations, they discussed the murder in detail, referencing key evidence and revealing where it had been hidden. Their statements revealed a complete indifference to the crime. Neither of them expressed any remorse. Instead, they were concerned about whether they would be caught and imprisoned. By this point, the police had gathered substantial evidence, and the recorded confessions solidified the case. Francesca and Davide were arrested and charged with murder. Both were jailed while awaiting trial. The first court hearing for Christian's murder took place on March 26, 2008. At the time, Francesca was in prison and pregnant. A few months later, she gave birth to a child who was immediately placed with a foster family. As the trial neared, Francesca and Davide, who initially denied any involvement in the crime, began blaming and accusing each other in hopes of getting a lighter sentence. Davide claimed that Francesca had pressured him into participating in the murder, citing psychological manipulation, jealousy, and subtle threats as the reasons behind his involvement. He portrayed himself as a reluctant participant in the brutal killing. Davide described Francesca as a manipulative person who relentlessly pressured him into killing her ex-husband, Christian. For a long time, Davide resisted, but over time, Francesca's lies and manipulations succeeded in persuading him. Francesca's trial was postponed multiple times. A key witness in the case was a neighbor who heard Christian's desperate cries for help while he was being beaten outside. Although the neighbor did not see the attackers' faces clearly, he insisted that apart from Francesca and Davide, no one else could have been involved. He was with Christian in his final moments until Christian was seriously injured and died from blood loss. He cooperated fully with the Carabinieri and police throughout the investigation, providing critical testimony to help hold the perpetrators accountable. While no murder weapon or clothing was recovered, having been disposed of by the criminals, recorded confessions were sufficient for a conviction. The investigation revealed that David used a knife while Francesca struck Christian with a hammer. Both tools were purchased shortly before the attack, indicating premeditation. After the murder, they threw the weapons into a river outside the city and burned their clothing. Based on their testimony, Francesca went to meet Christian with her children despite the restraining order he had against her. She claimed Christian allowed her inside, where she put the children to bed and spent time with them. Francesca alleged that Christian then began harassing her and kissed her. Meanwhile, Davide was waiting outside in the car. When she screamed, Davide rushed into the house. A fight broke out between Davide and Christian, ultimately leading to Christian's death. However, the prosecution strongly believed that the murder was premeditated, supported by extensive evidence and the prior planning of David and Francesca. The investigation revealed that they had purchased gloves, masks, and the murder weapon in advance, further supporting their intent. On October 30, 2008, after deliberating for over 9 hours, the jury convicted both Francesca Brandoli and Davide Ravarellas of murder. They were sentenced to life imprisonment. As a result of their crime, Francesca's children were left orphaned. Fortunately, Christian's parents gained custody and took care of the boys. Following the verdict, Francesca and Davide were sent to prison. Francesca, however, refused to accept the court's decision, maintaining that the murder had been Davide's idea. Driven by his jealousy, she claimed to have been coerced into participating and appealed the verdict. In letters written after the trial, Francesca accused David of planning the crime and attacking Christian, but these claims were deemed unreliable. Wiretap recordings captured Francesca casually discussing the murder without any sign of remorse. Confirming her active role in the crime, Francesca's claims were dismissed as yet another manipulative tactic. The crime and subsequent conviction irreparably damaged her and David's relationship, and they ended their partnership before their trials began. During her imprisonment, Francesca's health deteriorated, and she often complained about both her physical and emotional well-being. Her troubles escalated in 2009 when she attempted to harm herself, prompting authorities to keep a closer eye on her. News of Francesca's case has sparked debate about living conditions in Italian prisons. Activists and organizations criticized the correctional system for failing to rehabilitate inmates or prepare them for life after release. For prisoners serving life sentences, they argued the lack of hope often made death seem more bearable than enduring incarceration. Prisoners lack any motivation or reason to keep going. What do they have to live for? The prison authorities have been widely criticized for disregarding these serious issues. Yet, as usual, the response has been limited to a few generic statements made in televised appearances. On July 14, 2010, the Supreme Court upheld the decision and life sentence against Francesca, as real evidence and witness testimony disproved her lies. Both she and Davide remained in prison for life. This ruling was expected to close the case, which had become one of Italy's most sensational murder trials in recent years. However, journalists continued to follow Francesca's story closely as her life behind bars took unexpected turns. Despite breaking up with her lover, Davide, Francesca still craved love and sought happiness. While serving her sentence, she met another inmate, Luca Zambelli, who had been arrested on May 15, 2006, for the murder of his wife. Luca, an electrician at the time, had been living with his wife, Stefania Casolari, and their 2 children in a suburban apartment in Italy. Their marriage was falling apart, and by 2006, they were undergoing a divorce. Despite conflicts over custody and property, they were still living under the same roof. With no hope for reconciliation, Stefania had moved on and found a new partner, which deeply clashed with Luca's hopes of repairing their relationship. On May 15, 2006, while Stefania was speaking to her new lover on the phone, Luca overheard the flirtatious conversation and became enraged. Grabbing a kitchen knife, he attacked Stefania, stabbing her multiple times. Several of the wounds, especially those to her neck, proved fatal as they severed her carotid artery and trachea, leaving Stefania with no chance of survival. After killing her, Luca fled the scene, but he was arrested the following day. Although he initially claimed to remember nothing, investigators uncovered his violent and possessive behavior, which had driven Stefania to seek separation. Tragically, she had underestimated the threat he posed, which ultimately led to her murder. In 2007, Luca stood trial and received a 20-year prison sentence. He avoided a harsher penalty because his actions were deemed to result from an emotional outburst. The judge considered his rage and jealousy as mitigating factors. In addition to his sentence, Luca was ordered to pay €100,000 in compensation to his 2 children, who had lost both their parents. However, he never compensated the amount due to a lack of funds. In 2011, during an appeal, his prison term was reduced to 18 years after the court recognized that he suffered from a minor mental disorder and that his actions were driven by jealousy. It was during this time, while waiting for his appeal hearing, that Luca met Francesca. They claimed to have fallen in love instantly. On August 23, 2011, they decided to marry in prison. The wedding, which was held in the prison governor's office, was highly unusual and opposed by the couple's relatives. No family members were present. The only witnesses were prison guards, who signed the register. After a brief kiss, they were taken back to their separate cells. Following the wedding, they were allowed to meet 6 times a month instead of just once, but they were not permitted to spend the night together. As journalists later reported, their relationship seemed more a matter of convenience than genuine emotion. Francesca continued to assert Luca's innocence, stating that he regretted his mistake, which was causing Stefania's death. However, by 2016, 5 years after their marriage, Francesca and Luca decided to divorce by mutual agreement. In 2015, while in custody at San Vittore prison, Francesca was given the opportunity to work at the Milan Expo. This initiative aimed to help selected prisoners reintegrate into society. Later, she was transferred to the Balata Penitentiary, known for its innovative rehabilitation methods. However, after 2016, no significant updates or reports about Francesca emerged for several years. She continued her life as a regular inmate, serving a life sentence, until a tragic event occurred on the morning of March 31, 2025. During a routine inspection, a prison guard noticed an unusual silence coming from Francesca's cell. After knocking and receiving no response, the guard entered and discovered her lifeless body lying on her bedsheet. Attempts were made to resuscitate her, but they were unsuccessful. When medical personnel arrived, they could only confirm her death. Francesca, aged 52 at the time, had shown no recent signs of distress. In fact, just 15 days earlier, she had been assessed by medical staff who believed there was no immediate risk to her life. Her decision appeared to have been impulsive and shocked both the public and authorities. This incident brought back memories of Francesca's earlier struggles with mental health. She had tried to harm herself in a similar manner at least once. During an appeal phase in Bologna in 2009, she used a sheet but was saved by her cellmates, who noticed her attempt in time. Following that incident, she was placed under heightened monitoring as her risk of self-harm had been considered high at various points during her imprisonment. Caroline Serrano Cordero was born on December 21, 1993, in Heredia Province, Costa Rica. Since childhood, she was raised by her mother, Rosemary, because her biological father left the family. Later, Rosemary began a relationship with Miguel Ortiz, who stepped in as a father figure and treated Caroline as his own. They eventually had another daughter, Francine. Despite financial challenges, the family cultivated a warm and loving home. Rosemary became known for her hard work, selling traditional Mexican foods like tamales to support her family. She became a role model for Caroline, a symbol of strength and independence. After Rosemary and Miguel separated, she was again raising her two daughters on her own. Later, she married Roman Giron, who accepted Caroline and Francine into his life as his own. Together, Rosemary and Roman had three sons, Rayundo, Omar, and Simon, forming a large, blended family. As the eldest, Caroline was responsible for all the housework, taking care of her younger siblings, and always devoted herself to helping her mother from a young age. While growing up, she dreamed of becoming a lawyer to stand up for others and resolve conflicts within the justice system. However, due to financial difficulties, she had to put her university plans on hold and decided to work first. At 20, Caroline began dating someone and later gave birth to her daughter, Amanda, in 2016. Although her relationship with Amanda's father ended, he remained involved in their daughter's life. Focused on providing for Amanda, she began working at Bimbo Bakery in Heredia. With a steady income, she rented a home in the La Milpa neighborhood of San Francisco, not far from her mother, but still in a different area. Despite her own expenses, Caroline continued to support her mother, Rosemary, financially, and showed gestures of love on special occasions. While Caroline worked, Amanda stayed with her grandmother, keeping the family tightly connected. Maintaining strong family relationships remained her top priority. Although she was financially independent and devoted to her daughter, Caroline longed for love and companionship. In 2018, when she was 24, she met someone new, a man named Jubilo Hidalgo, who was 21 at the time. They met while working together at Bimbo Bakery. Jubilo appeared kind, respectful, and persistent in showing his interest, giving no indication of having a hidden life. Unbeknownst to Caroline, Jubilo was already married and lived with his wife in San Pablo de Heredia. He carefully concealed this from her, avoiding any mention of his personal life and never introducing her to his family or friends. Their relationship progressed quickly, but Caroline hesitated to introduce Jubilo to her mother. Something didn't feel right, and she found herself doubting his intentions. Whenever Caroline asked about their future or requested clarity, Jubilo evaded the questions. He avoided meeting her family and kept their relationship private, offering vague explanations. Over time, Caroline began to feel that he was hiding something. Still, she chose to trust his assurances that his reluctance wasn't because of another woman. He promised that things would change and asked her to wait, convincing her to remain patient and hopeful. Despite her insecurities, Caroline tried to stay calm and hoped that time would clear things up. However, Jubilo's avoidance and actions only made her more suspicious of the relationship. Despite her doubt, Caroline didn't end the relationship. She clung to the hope that she could turn things around. All she wanted was a genuine, respectful partnership. However, over time, the harsh reality began to set in. Her hopes went unfulfilled. The relationship became one-sided, revolving entirely around Jubilo's terms. Caroline remained emotionally attached, but increasingly uncertain about her place in his life. The mounting tension shook her trust in him, leading to inevitable conflicts. For the first time, Caroline demanded answers from Kubillo, and from that moment, things began to unravel. Instead of moving toward a reconciliation, the situation spiraled toward tragedy. On August 6, 2019, she sent him a message via a chat app featuring a photo of a positive pregnancy test. However, the image was fake, downloaded from the internet. She wasn't pregnant. It was a desperate attempt to prompt Kubillo to take responsibility and openly acknowledge their relationship. She hoped the news would make him reevaluate his priorities and finally lead to an honest conversation. But his response was nothing like she had imagined. To Kubillo, the photo wasn't a call for change, it was a threat. He feared that if the pregnancy was real, their secret relationship would be exposed, ruining his reputation and his personal life. Terrified of these consequences, he decided to take extreme action, eliminate Caroline completely. Kubillo no longer wanted to talk or resolve the conflict. Over the next few days, he began looking for people to carry out his plan. He initially approached adults, but when they refused, he turned to minors, believing they were easier to manipulate. Finally, Kubillo approached a teenage girl who was known for causing trouble. He offered her a vague plan to solve the problem, emphasizing that the goal was to make things stop. The girl agreed in exchange for $250 and a pack of cigarettes. Kubillo agreed, and she began looking for more people to join. The young woman connected with a 19-year-old man named Soto Rodriguez, who was involved in street gangs and had a history of engaging in youth crime. Soto quickly agreed, bringing along another 17-year-old, whose identity has not been revealed. Altogether, at least 4 individuals, including Kubillo, were implicated in the plan. Each was promised a share of the payment. The mission is very clear: eliminate Caroline. The plan was simple: lure her to an isolated location and carry out the act swiftly and quietly. The girl involved also took on the task of purchasing weapons under Kubillo's direction. She bought a gun of unknown origin. Her actions suggested familiarity with underground networks. Moving quickly, she brought the weapon for the plan to proceed. The group agreed to execute the act at night in a secluded area. The teenagers didn't fully grasp that they were becoming accomplices to a premeditated crime. To them, it was just a job, a task to complete without considering the long-term consequences. Meanwhile, Kubillo distanced himself, subtly orchestrating events while remaining in control, yet out of sight. Unaware of the deadly plan unfolding, Caroline continued to hold on to the hope that she could salvage the relationship. Unfortunately, her attempt to save the relationship inadvertently triggered a tragedy that had already been arranged. On the 12th of August, 2019, Kubillo contacted Caroline through a messaging app, inviting her to what he described as a casual get-together with friends at a scenic overlook in the Bava area. He assured her it would be a relaxed outing and that she would be home later that night. Trusting him, Caroline agreed. On the evening, Caroline left Rosemary's house, saying she was going to meet some friends and would come back later. When she got into the car, everyone involved in the plan was already present. Kubillo, an underage girl, Soto, and another teenage boy. They drove about 4 miles to a remote location. Once there, they led Caroline to a dark, isolated spot where the horrifying plan unfolded. Using a firearm, Kubillo fatally attacked Caroline in the head. This was later confirmed in testimonies from the young accomplices, who revealed that while they restrained Caroline by holding her arms, it was Kubillo who fired the fatal shot. Initially, the group planned to burn her body, but they abandoned the idea out of fear that the flames would attract attention and fail to fully destroy evidence. Instead, since they were in a remote area, they decided to bury her in a shallow grave. They dug up the clay and expected wildlife to destroy the grave, scattering the remains and making it difficult to collect evidence. The decision to bury her was made on the spot and was not part of any detailed plan. After the crime, the group returned to the car, and Cubillo dropped everyone off at their homes. Later that night, he went to Carolay's house and removed any personal belongings she might have left behind, including her purse, ID, and phone, to make it look like she had left her home voluntarily. His aim was to create the illusion that she had vanished on her own and avoid arousing suspicion. As night fell, Carolay's mother, Rosemary, became increasingly worried. She tried calling her daughter, but there was no response. Her text messages went unread. In their family, leaving home without notice was unheard of. Carolai always informed her mother if she was running late, but now there was only silence, growing more unbearable by the minute. The following morning, Rosemary tried to convince herself that maybe Carolai had been called unexpectedly into work, but by late afternoon, she decided to visit her daughter's home. The front gate was unlocked. Inside, the lights were on, the television was playing, and her hair straightener was still plugged in. Everything indicated that Carolai hadn't planned to be away long. It seemed as though she had just stepped out for a moment, but that moment stretched into a full day. No longer able to wait, Rosemary contacted the local authorities and reported her daughter missing. Over 24 hours had now passed since their last conversation. Meanwhile, the family wasn't waiting idly. They put up flyers, spoke to neighbors, and tried retracing Carolay's steps themselves, but nobody, not even her closest neighbors, had seen her since Monday, August 12, 2019. For Rosemary, time felt frozen in a torturous loop. Each hour without news dragged endlessly. Rosemary replayed every recent detail in her mind: who had contacted Carolai, what she had said in the last few days, and who she might have been messaging. Troubling pieces of information began to surface: reports of a strange man near her house, an unfamiliar voice in a voicemail, and Carolai's recently tense demeanor. At the time, none of it made complete sense, but deep down, Rosemary feared something serious had happened. The police in Heredia promptly responded to the missing person report and began an official investigation into Carolai's disappearance. They started interviewing her friends, family, neighbors, and co-workers to gather any clues. Unfortunately, Rosemary couldn't point to anyone specific. Her daughter was supposed to meet that evening, making those initial steps more difficult. None of the family's close acquaintances had seen or heard from her. Investigators turned to surveillance footage in the area where Carolai lived. Around 10:45 p.m., cameras at a supermarket in Los Lagos captured her arriving and getting into a white Honda CR-V. She entered the car willingly, with no purse and no phone in sight. The footage showed the vehicle driving off into the night. This became the first promising lead, but identifying the driver or the license plate proved challenging due to poor camera angles. This slowed the investigation. In the following 24 hours, authorities worked relentlessly to find Carolai. They issued missing person alerts and officially opened a case, but no new information surfaced. No witnesses, no tips, and no trace of her. Her phone remained untraceable, and her bank account showed no activity. This made it increasingly doubtful that she had left voluntarily. There were no physical clues, no known disputes, and no one came forward with useful information. As a result, the police began reconsidering their initial assumptions. What first appeared to be a voluntary disappearance started to seem like a potential criminal act. The idea that Carolai had willingly left on her own became increasingly implausible. At the time, neither Carolai's family nor investigators suspected Cubillo had anything to do with her disappearance. To everyone, she was simply missing. However, despite the perpetrators' efforts to cover their tracks, their plan began to unravel. Days passed without any sign of Carolai, and police investigated numerous leads, Though no breakthroughs were made, for her family, the wait was agonizing. Filled with uncertainty and emotional pain, the grief deepened on important days. In December 2019, the family held a small vigil in memory of Caroline on what would have been her 26th birthday. The Christmas season passed quietly, without any celebrations. No decorations, no tree, leaving only grief and unanswered questions. As time went on, with no progress in the investigation, the family began to feel forgotten. Determined to keep her daughter's memory alive, Rosemary, Caroline's mother, created a social media page specifically to raise awareness about her disappearance. She shared photos of Caroline, detailed the circumstances of her vanishing, and pleaded for information from anyone who might have seen or heard something. Through this page, she connected with other families facing similar tragedies, and over time, the platform evolved into a supportive community for sharing grief, stories, and updates. The unresolved loss weighed heavily on everyone, including Caroline's 3-year-old daughter, Amanda, too young to fully comprehend what had happened. Amanda often asked why her mother wasn't coming back. The adults struggled to find answers, eventually telling her that her mother had become a star in the sky. Amanda would frequently look up at the stars, finding some comfort in believing her mother was watching over her. At the beginning of 2020, nearly half a year after Caroline went missing, the case saw its first significant breakthrough. Law enforcement authorities received an anonymous tip. The caller suggested that human remains might be located on an abandoned farm near the Bava volcano in Heredia province. On February 5, police and dog units searched the remote, heavily wooded mountainous area. Forensic teams and investigators joined the search, spending hours combing through the rugged terrain. However, their efforts yielded no evidence, no signs of burial or human activity. The day ended without results. The following day, Caroline's family decided to visit the site themselves. Along a forest trail, they spotted a suspicious bag. Inside, they found bones. They immediately alerted the police, but after laboratory analysis, it was confirmed that the remains were not human, but animal. What had been a moment of hope quickly turned into profound heartbreak. Then, on the 11th of February, a new lead emerged. A local man, Juan Manuel Montero, who often walked in the area, discovered several items near a mountain trail: underwear, a blouse, shoes, and clumps of long, dark hair. He contacted the authorities, noting that the clothing matched the outfit Caroline had been wearing the night she disappeared. On the 12th of February, a new investigative team searched the area, finally achieving a breakthrough. They uncovered human remains, a skull, pelvic bones, fragments of femurs, and strands of long hair nearby. Forensic experts began collecting DNA samples to identify the remains, using genetic material from Caroline's mother, Rosemary. However, confirming the results would take 10 weeks. Despite the delay, investigators still believed the remains were likely those of Caroline. Based on the location, condition of the remains, and the presence of personal effects at the scene, information was shared with Rosemary delicately, as the identification process was still pending. As news of the discovery spread through local media, a funeral home offered to cover the family's burial costs, a rare yet significant act of kindness. However, until formal identification was completed, the family could not proceed with burying their loved one. Although evidence had surfaced, critical questions lingered: who was responsible, and what had truly happened to Caroline? In search of answers, the investigation team expanded its scope. They began reviewing all registered owners of white Honda CR-Vs in Heredia province, focusing especially on employees of Bimbo, where Caroline had worked. The search led them to one specific individual, Cubillo Hidalgo, the owner of a white Honda CR-V. The authorities monitored Cubillo, and carried out a series of operations in the areas of Rincon de Ricardo and Los Molinos. During the operation, Cubillo was arrested along with 3 other youths, Soto Rodriguez, 19, and 2 others under the age of 18. During the search, the investigation team seized phones, clothing, and other related items. Particular attention was given to Cubillo's vehicle, which was sent to forensics for examination, including testing for traces of blood, biological material, and fingerprints. Authorities also searched the home of one of the teenagers, where they uncovered blood-stained clothing. All evidence was sent to a laboratory for analysis. Additionally, investigators gained access to private messages exchanged between Caroline and Cubillo. These messages revealed escalating conflict surrounding a possible pregnancy, and Caroline's demands that Cubillo publicly acknowledge their relationship. The messages provided a motive for the crime. Furthermore, Caroline had apparently been unaware that Cubillo was married, a fact that became a key element in the prosecution's case. The investigation now firmly linked Caroline's disappearance to Cubillo and those within his circle. The case moved from the investigation stage to criminal prosecution, as each suspect was exposed for his role in the case, and the shady activities were hidden behind the facade of normal life. Following the arrests, investigators quickly began interrogations. Confronted with overwhelming evidence, 2 of the minors admitted their involvement, confessing to their participation in both planning and executing the crime. Confessions, physical evidence, and recovered digital messages shed light on the entire incident. Caroline was targeted in a meticulously planned act by Cubillo, assisted by his young accomplices. This was no random incident or accident. It was a premeditated crime. The proceedings began with the minor girl who helped organize the crime. She was charged as an accomplice. In court, prosecutors presented her testimony, messages exchanged with Cubillo, and additional evidence proving her involvement in planning the crime. Despite the gravity of her actions, the court sentenced her to 12 years, factoring in the time she had already served in juvenile detention while awaiting her trial. Rosemary, Caroline's mother, attended the court proceedings but found the verdict hard to accept. She felt the sentence did not reflect the severity of the crime. Her family's lawyer announced plans to pursue the maximum penalty of 15 years, which is the highest sentence allowed for minors under Costa Rican law. Separately, a hearing was held for Cubillo Hidalgo and Soto Rodriguez. Both men pled guilty, leading the court to grant a fast-track trial. Each received a 24-year prison sentence for their involvement in the crime. The court also ordered Cubillo to compensate Rosemary by giving her his vehicle, motorcycle, and $1,000 in cash. Another minor involved in the case was still under investigation. With his case being reviewed by the juvenile court, no further details were shared publicly, and a final decision was expected in the coming months. This meant Caroline's story was not yet fully resolved. Rosemary decided to use the compensation money to improve their living conditions. She began renovating their home to create a private room for Amanda. As the family took on full responsibility for Amanda's care, they did everything possible to ensure she felt safe and loved. Support came not only from the legal system, but also from the community. Locals and strangers from all over the country reached out to help Rosemary. Many people ordered the traditional tamales, which she had been making. Despite the distance, people traveled to pick up their orders and offer words of encouragement. The response was overwhelming, with people bringing groceries, providing practical help, and sending heartfelt messages. This collective kindness became a source of strength for Rosemary during one of the most difficult times in her life. One day, when Amanda was playing in the yard with her grandmother, she noticed a white feather gently floating down and landing in her lap. Looking up, she said that her mum had sent it from heaven. From that day on, Amanda wore the feather in her hair until she accidentally lost it in her room. That small but meaningful moment became a cherished memory for the entire family. Colca Canyon, located in the Arequipa region of southern Peru, is a stunning yet challenging natural wonder. As the deepest canyon in the world, plunging over 13,400 feet, it presents a dramatic landscape dominated by thin air, fluctuating temperatures, and unpredictable weather. These features make the canyon an ideal destination for adventurers, but also pose risks for unprepared visitors. Over the years, Colca Canyon has attracted visitors not only for its natural beauty, but also for heartbreaking stories of people getting lost or in distress. For locals who are familiar with this harsh land, this is a place where nature reigns supreme. On March 30, 2011, a young couple, Ciro Castillo and Rosario Ponce Lopez, ventured into the canyon. Both were college students and had only been dating for a few months. Despite their lack of experience with dangerous hiking, they chose to travel alone, bypassing guided tours or group tours. Their goal was to reach the ancient Chimpa Fortress, an archaeological site overlooking the canyon. Their journey began in the towns of Chivay and Madrigal, where they stocked up on water and food before entering the canyon along a well-trodden trail used by other hikers. The route they chose was familiar, easy to recognize, and not considered particularly difficult, so it did not require any special skills. However, they underestimated the terrain's challenges and the effects of the high altitude. While Ciro had basic survival knowledge, they lacked vital navigation tools such as a global positioning system or an emergency beacon, and they had no clear contingency plan. Confident in their abilities, they carried only the essentials: water, food, and warm clothing, but overlooked potential dangers. This overconfidence would later prove to be a critical oversight. Initially, their trip seemed to proceed as planned. Witness accounts and photographs from their early days in the canyon depicted them as calm and optimistic. Yet, beneath this calm exterior, they were woefully unprepared for unforeseen challenges. In such rugged terrain, a single misstep can quickly spiral into disaster. Sudden changes in weather, rocky landscapes, and encounters with wildlife all posed serious threats they had not adequately considered. To complicate matters, they had not shared their exact itinerary with family or friends, nor had they established a reliable way to check in regularly. Equipped with limited communication tools, insufficient supplies, and an overestimation of their abilities, they faced mounting risks, a situation that would later have devastating consequences. The tragic story began with this trip, which shocked the entire nation and sparked a wave of controversy. At first, it was just a sightseeing trip in a stunningly beautiful area, but it quickly turned into a case that drew significant attention, with elements such as a mysterious disappearance, conflicting testimonies, legal investigations, and a public trust that was shaken. When Ciro and Rosario set out on their journey, no one, including themselves, could have imagined that only one would return. Ciro Castillo Rojo was born on May 16, 1984, in Lima, Peru. His father, Dr. Ciro Castillo Sr., was a well-known physician, while his mother, Rosario Garcia Caballero, was a homemaker. Although little is known about Ciro's early life, his love for the outdoors and his adventurous spirit were well documented. This passion led him to study forestry at the Agrarian University in Lima. During his time there, he met Rosario Ponce Lopez. Rosario, born on October 6, 1986, also in Lima, was the daughter of Eduardo Ponce and Maria del Carmen Lopez. By the time she met Ciro, she had already endured significant personal struggles. At 17, she became pregnant by a young man named Abbas. Although their romantic relationship ended, they remained in contact. Rosario began dating Ciro while he was still recovering emotionally from his breakup with Isabel Segura, who had described him as a kind and thoughtful person. Rosario, on the other hand, was dealing with emotional wounds from her own past. Despite this, their relationship was passionate and intense. They started dating in late 2010, and just 4 months later, they began planning a trip through southern Peru. Both were nearing the end of their university studies and felt they deserved a break. Their journey started with visits to Cusco and Puno before heading to Colca Canyon at the end of March. Ciro was especially eager to hike to the ruins of an ancient fortress, a plan Rosario enthusiastically supported. Their final stop before beginning the hike was the village of Madrigal, from where they prepared to climb toward Chimpa Fortress. The road to Chimpa was fairly easy to follow, with well-marked and well-traveled trails. Under normal conditions, the risk of getting lost was low. However, Ciro and Rosario made the unexplainable decision to leave the main path and take an alternate route. This decision turned out to be disastrous, leading them deep into an unfamiliar and more perilous part of the canyon from which they could not escape on their own. On April 4, 2011, while exploring the Colca region, they were seen by two miners, Tito Lupa and Miro Candori, who were working nearby. The miners reported that Ciro and Rosario seemed fine, showing no signs of distress or panic. Ciro even spoke to them, explaining where they planned to go. This was the last confirmed sighting of Ciro and Rosario together, both of whom appeared to be in good condition. But everything changed shortly afterward. That same day, Ciro's last confirmed communication took place. He and Rosario called her friend Efrain Matos, informing him they had lost the trail and didn't know their exact location. Ciro personally spoke during the call, but by the next day, events took a grim turn. Rosario's subsequent messages to Efrain no longer mentioned Ciro. She began sending distressed messages, saying she was lost and pleading for help. According to Rosario, on the evening of April 4, they decided to separate. Exhausted and unable to continue, she stayed in what she thought was a relatively safe spot, while Ciro went to seek help, heading toward what they believed was the nearest settlement, visible from a distance. Rosario said she never saw him again. After Ciro left, darkness fell, and the temperature plummeted. Rosario sheltered among rocks to endure the night. By morning, Ciro had not returned. Over the following days, completely alone, Rosario struggled to survive. With no food or way to navigate, she claimed to have lived off grass, bark, small insects, and water from streams. Her greatest challenges, however, were psychological, the constant fear of wild animals like pumas, and the overwhelming isolation. By April 6, even before Ciro and Rosario had been officially reported missing, 3 rescue teams and 14 trained specialists, along with local volunteers, began searching for them. Rescuers were hopeful the two were taking shelter in a cave or hidden among the rocks, but no voice, footprints, or other signs were discovered in the search area. The effort continued for nearly 2 weeks. Finally, on April 13, Rosario was found in the highlands near a location later named Cerro Fortaleza. Severely weakened, she was given emergency care on site, airlifted to a Red Cross clinic in Arequipa, and later transferred to a private hospital in Lima. Doctors said she suffered from severe dehydration, weight loss, eye damage from sun and wind exposure, and general exhaustion, but found no signs of a struggle or foul play. Rosario was stable enough to give her first statement shortly after being rescued. She stated that while she waited, Ciro had gone for help. Her rescue became a major news story in Peru, but skepticism quickly grew regarding her version of events since Ciro remained missing. The public grew wary of Rosario's behavior. Despite her ordeal, she displayed remarkable composure, showing no visible signs of emotional distress during interviews. Her calm, precise, and unemotional responses led many to question her sincerity, leading to speculation that her reactions were unnatural. Ciro's parents, particularly his mother, struggled to accept that their son could simply vanish without a trace. They placed their hopes on Rosario, the last person to see Ciro alive, expecting her to provide clear answers. However, her account remained vague and inconsistent. Ciro's mother claimed that, before Rosario was rescued, she had shared a different version of events during a phone call. Reportedly, Rosario mentioned seeing distant lights at night, which prompted Ciro to plan a trip in that direction the following morning. Rosario, citing exhaustion, chose not to accompany him. However, this account conflicted with the official statements Rosario made after being hospitalized. As time passed, more inconsistencies in Rosario's story surfaced. In various interviews, she provided contradictory details, sometimes stating that Ciro left in the morning and at other times saying he left at night. In some versions, there was a disagreement between them. In others, they made the decision together. These discrepancies raised suspicions among investigators and the media, leading to growing doubts about the credibility of Rosario's narrative. Public opinion began to shift, leaving the question looming. Was Rosario being truthful? Amid this uncertainty, Ciro's father traveled to Chivay to join the search for his son in person. He actively cooperated with rescue teams and urged them to continue the search. Despite the expanded search area combed by police and military units, attention turned to Rosario's incomplete and puzzling story. By mid-April, with no significant progress made, Ciro's father wrote a letter to then-President Alan Garcia, urging for direct government intervention and a more substantial search effort. The plea succeeded. The military became involved, providing helicopters, equipment, and high-altitude specialists. The National Police also deployed investigative teams specializing in serious crimes and missing persons cases. Search efforts scaled up rapidly, with 16 teams, including around 50 people, exploring an expanded area of the Colca Canyon. But the coordinates Rosario provided yielded no significant discoveries. In desperation, Ciro's father offered a cash reward to anyone with information about his son's whereabouts. The published phone number received many calls, but none yielded any significant leads. Authorities noted many false reports and scams, leaving most of the information at a standstill. Despite this, his father refused to give up. He worked on designing a new search grid, collaborated with government agencies, and enlisted the help of the Chinchis, an elite police unit skilled in navigating extreme terrain. These officers inspected the most inaccessible parts of the canyon, from caves and rocky formations to glacial areas and sheer cliffs. Weeks turned into months, yet no sign of Ciro. His belongings, or any physical evidence of his presence, was found. Every theory remained unproven, and the operation became the longest civilian rescue effort in Peru's history. As media coverage began to wane, Ciro's father persisted. He was determined to find his son, alive or not, and bring him home. During this time, he criticized Rosario for her refusal to return to Colca to assist in the investigation, citing emotional exhaustion as her reasoning. For Ciro's family, this was more of a way of avoiding responsibility. As tensions escalated, the idea of filing a formal complaint against Rosario, Ciro's last known companion, gained traction. Each day, Ciro's father continued to hope that rescue teams would deliver the long-awaited news that they had found him. Around this time, investigators uncovered video footage taken during the search. The footage showed Rosario attending a street celebration, looking relaxed, smiling, and dressed well, with no visible signs of illness or exhaustion. Alarmingly, the video was dated the same day. Her attorney claimed health issues to excuse her absence from legal proceedings. The public reacted strongly, and her image as a survivor of tragedy began to unravel. Doubts deepened, and many began to suspect that Rosario might be withholding critical information. As public pressure mounted, the prosecutor's office intensified its investigation. Under scrutiny, Rosario eventually agreed to participate in a reconstruction of the hike on the condition that her parents could accompany her. On the first day, however, her parents cited exhaustion and were unable to continue, leading to the reenactment being postponed. It was not until late August, during the second attempt, that Rosario joined investigators for part of the trail. However, this effort revealed no new evidence or leads. Her emotionally reserved demeanor during the reconstruction elicited mixed reactions from the public. Further skepticism arose when Rosario's mother publicly suggested that Ciro might have intentionally abandoned Rosario in the mountains. Although many dismissed this theory as far-fetched, it further fueled suspicions, particularly as hopes of finding Ciro alive began to fade. Despite lingering doubts and inconsistencies, the prosecution still lacked concrete evidence to accuse Rosario of any wrongdoing. By this stage, public perception of Rosario had shifted. It was no longer a straightforward story of survival. A critical aspect of the investigation centered on Rosario's camera, which investigators had been aware of since her rescue. However, the camera was not handed over to authorities until nearly a month later, and no independent forensic analysis was conducted during this intervening period. Only after mounting public pressure did Rosario's legal team finally surrender the device to prosecutors, leading to serious concerns about the delay. Why had an item that could potentially contain crucial evidence not been submitted immediately? When the camera was finally analyzed by forensic experts, the high-tech crime unit discovered signs of possible tampering. The file structure had been disrupted, and 9 photographs were missing from the sequence. Rosario denied ever deleting or altering the images, but forensic analysts concluded that the deletions had been intentional. While the missing photos could not be fully recovered, their file numbers and timestamps appeared to place them during the time Ciro and Rosario were deep in Colca Canyon, one of the trail's most remote areas. Investigators speculated that these photos might have documented events contradicting Rosario's version of events. Additional suspicions arose from the remaining photos. Experts observed that the angles, shadows, and positioning of the camera suggested that not all the photos could have been taken by either Rosario or Ciro, prompting investigators to consider the possibility of a third person being present during the hike from the very beginning. The investigation then turned its focus to Rosario's personal background. Before dating Ciro, she had been romantically involved with Victor Cabrera, the son of her eventual defense attorney. In 2011, rumors began circulating that Victor might have secretly accompanied Rosario on the trip and concealed his involvement. These speculations gained traction as irregularities in the photos and the deleted images were mentioned as potential evidence. Years later, Rosario would marry Victor, but at the time, no direct evidence tied him to the hike. No witnesses reported having seen Victor or anyone else with Ciro and Rosario during their journey. Investigators were unable to definitively determine who might have appeared in the questionable photos or why images involving that individual had been deleted. Rosario continued to insist that she had not touched the camera after her rescue, but forensic evidence suggested otherwise. Officially, this theory remained unproven, yet it persisted in the public's imagination. Doubts about Rosario's honesty deepened, with many questioning whether she had truly been alone with Ciro at the time. The case took a critical turn months later. On October 16, 2011, more than 6 months after Ciro's disappearance, a search team discovered his remains near Mount Bomboa. His body was located on a narrow rock ledge in the Las Silas Cascade, one of the canyon's most difficult to access areas. This location was close to the area where Rosario had been rescued, but several hundred feet below the point at which they were believed to have separated. Earlier searches of this area had been incomplete due to its challenging terrain. The body was discovered curled in a fetal position. Ciro was barefoot, wearing only socks that showed significant wear and tear. Nearby, rescuers found scattered personal items along the slope, including a lighter, a hat, a scarf, and fragments of clothing. A bright red piece of fabric, believed to be part of his jacket, was visible on a rock. This distinctive color helped the search team locate the area from a distance. It took over 2 hours to recover the body, which was subsequently transported to Arequipa for forensic analysis. The official report identified the cause of death as multiple injuries sustained from a significant fall. Fractures were recorded in the skull, collarbone, right arm, and ribs. Experts concluded that the trauma was not instantly fatal. Ciro survived for approximately 8 hours after the fall, but ultimately succumbed to internal injuries and hypothermia. A key question is whether outside interference can be ruled out. The autopsy revealed no signs of blunt force trauma, weapon-inflicted wounds, or evidence of a struggle or physical restraint. Forensic experts concluded that the fall did not result from an assault by another person. Although this conclusion remains controversial, investigators closely examined the condition of Ciro's socks. The report noted small holes on the soles, likely resulting from the fall rather than prolonged walking over rough terrain. Furthermore, experts stated that if Ciro had been pushed or thrown, the distribution and extent of his injuries would have differed, with more severe internal trauma. Despite these findings, lingering questions remained. Why was he without shoes? Why was his body found relatively close to where Rosario had been located, yet undiscovered for months? How did extensive search efforts fail to locate him earlier? Investigators also acknowledged that a fall from a significant height could have displaced the body, complicating the evidence. The forensic report provided no definitive answers. Officially, Ciro's death was ruled accidental, potentially caused by a misstep, disorientation, or an attempt to descend in search of help. However, for Ciro's family and the public, this conclusion left many unresolved questions. Most troubling was the fact that Ciro died alone, and the only person who might fully understand what happened was Rosario. However, her account remained inconsistent, raising further doubts. Following the discovery of Ciro's body, investigators uncovered what they deemed critical evidence. Rather than closing the case, it led to a renewed phase of legal proceedings. The district attorney's office reopened the investigation, reviewing testimony, forensic reports, and digital data to determine whether Ciro's death was a crime or merely an accident. In October 2011, Rosario was summoned for further questioning, as authorities hoped her testimony might change or expand now that Ciro's death had been confirmed. She maintained her account, claiming that Ciro had left to seek help while she stayed behind, reiterating that it was a tragic accident. Around this time, prosecutors announced plans to conduct additional forensic tests and interview new witnesses. By December, investigators officially requested a 120-day extension to thoroughly review medical records, digital evidence, including photos from Rosario's camera, witness statements, and search operation reports. While accidental death remained the primary explanation, documents suggested that the possibility of external involvement had not been entirely ruled out. Amid this period of legal uncertainty, Rosario appeared on a televised interview to discuss the incident. Showing visible tension, she attempted a faint smile. When asked directly about the investigation, she said that he fell, that it was an accident, and that it was terrible, but true. The public reaction was overwhelmingly negative, with viewers criticizing both her testimony and her lack of emotion. In early 2012, Rosario's legal team requested the dismissal of all proceedings, arguing there was insufficient evidence of any wrongdoing. Meanwhile, the prosecutor's office asked the National Police to provide additional information. Around the same time, leaked audio of an interrogation appeared in the media, suggesting Rosario may have faced pressure from investigators. This prompted an internal review into the investigators' handling of the case. During this period, Ciro's parents continued to push for the investigation to proceed. His father openly criticized the prosecutors, accusing them of negligence and alleging that over 200 pieces of evidence, including indirect clues, had been ignored. He stressed that Rosario was the only person present at the scene when Ciro went missing, and her conflicting statements made it impossible to close the case without a full reconstruction of events and direct questioning. Despite public pressure and the family's demands, the prosecutor's office made its final decision in September 2013. The Second Court of Appeals in Arequipa officially closed the case, citing insufficient evidence to support criminal charges. This decision marked the end of the investigation. For Ciro's parents, the case's closure felt profoundly unjust. His father described the decision as a failure of justice and accused investigators of wasting valuable time and making serious mistakes. Conversely, Rosario's lawyer maintained that she had been unfairly targeted from the start, arguing that the accusations were speculative and lacked clear evidence. Thus, one of Peru's most high-profile investigations ended without trials, charges, or resolutions, leaving many questions unanswered. Even after the case's formal closure in September 2013, public interest in Ciro's disappearance and death lingered. The investigation had ended, but debates persisted as theories, inconsistencias, and suspicions continued to circulate. At the heart of the controversy was Rosario, whose role in the case continued to attract attention and scrutiny. 2 years later, in September 2015, media outlets published photos of Rosario's wedding to Victor, the son of her former lawyer, Miguel Cabrera. The private ceremony, along with reports that Rosario was expecting a child, reignited public curiosity. Some have questioned Victor's connection to the events at Colca and have suggested that Rosario and Victor knew each other before she met Ciro, raising many unanswered questions. Ciro's family, particularly his father, never accepted the conclusion that his death was accidental. He always believed that the evidence was not convincing enough and that the investigation had missed many important clues. Ciro's father believed that his son's death was not the result of a random mistake, but was related to external factors. Rosario's public image remains controversial. While there is no direct evidence of wrongdoing, her actions, such as delaying the handover of cameras, deleting photos, and failing to cooperate at key points in the investigation, have raised suspicions. An interview in which she smiled tensely and participated in public celebrations during a time when she was reportedly emotionally distressed only fueled further public doubt. Legally, the case was closed. However, for Ciro's family and a large portion of the public, the investigation felt unresolved. Many believed the truth had been omitted from the official findings and that the real answers remained beyond reach. Naomi Irian was born on 25 June 2003 in the small town of Fernley, Lyon County, Nevada, USA. She was born into a family with 2 older brothers. Tragically, one of them died in infancy due to health problems 2 years before Naomi's birth. His death was a devastating blow to the Irian family, so much so that Diana Irian, Naomi's mother, needed psychological support. A little over a year later, Diana discovered she was pregnant again. She felt a mix of happiness and fear. This pregnancy was difficult, both emotionally and physically. Doctors identified several potential complications, requiring constant monitoring at the clinic. There was a significant risk that the child wouldn't survive. Therefore, when Diana heard Naomi's first cry, she was overjoyed that she had given birth to a healthy girl. Now, the family had 2 children, Asson, Casey Valley, and a daughter, Naomi, but the parents weren't planning to stop there. They wanted a large family, and decided to adopt. In 2018, they adopted 3 boys. By that time, Naomi was old enough to help her mother care for her younger brothers. The Irian family's life was full of activity. Herve, the head of the family, worked as a diplomat and frequently traveled for his job. Thanks to his work, the family had the opportunity to live and travel around the world. Naomi spent time with her parents in France, Germany, Russia, and South Africa. She was inquisitive, intelligent, and easily made friends with other children. However, due to their constant moves, she didn't have the chance to form deep, lasting friendships. She maintained friendly relationships with at least one good friend in each country. In 2021, Naomi graduated from the American International School in Johannesburg. The Irian family, though well-traveled and adventurous, lived a modest lifestyle and emphasized the importance of hard work. Diana, in addition to raising her 4 children, also desired to pursue her personal interests and ambitions. Naomi was passionate about books and music. She played the ukulele and piano, enjoyed singing, and sought self-improvement. Her travels exposed her to diverse cultures. When Naomi reached adulthood, the Irian family was still living in South Africa and had no immediate plans to move. However, Naomi wanted to return to her homeland in Nevada, where her older brother Casey had already relocated. He agreed to provide her with a place to stay and help her get settled. Naomi saw this move as the beginning of her independence. She quickly found a job at a Panasonic factory in Fernley, working in the battery production department. Despite being only 18 years old, she seemed mature and ambitious, eager to achieve career success and independence. Her immediate goal was to save money. She wanted to buy her own home, as she was currently living with her brother and his girlfriend. She was also saving for college. The plant where Naomi worked was quite a distance from her home. However, she didn't need to drive all the way there. The company provided a corporate bus that picked up employees from several locations in the suburbs. One of these pickup points was near the Walmart parking lot on the outskirts of Fernley. Every morning, Naomi would drive her own car to the Walmart parking lot, wait for the bus, and then travel to the factory. After her shift, the corporate bus would drop her back at the parking lot, where she would get into her car and drive home. This routine was familiar to Naomi, as she had followed it almost every day for several months. After her move, this lifestyle suited her well, and her parents supported her ambition. Her brother, at that time, was serving in the Navy, working at Apple, and pursuing his education. Naomi's day on March 12, 2022, started like any other. She woke up early and drove to the Walmart parking lot, arriving around 5 a.m. to wait for the company bus. She bought a snack at the gas station and then sat in her car. Phone records show she used social media from 9 a.m. to 5:23 a.m. Other Walmart employees waiting at the bus stop noticed something strange. Around 5:30 a.m., a man in a dark hoodie was standing near Naomi's car. By her open window, they saw Naomi and the man talking. Then, Naomi moved to the passenger seat. The man got into the driver's seat, and he drove her car out of the parking lot in an unknown direction. Initially, no one was concerned when Naomi left, assuming she was getting a ride from a friend who would return soon. But during Naomi's shift at Panasonic, her manager kept asking where she was. Her co-workers realized she hadn't arrived, which was unusual because Naomi was a dedicated employee who never missed work. She also regularly communicated with her family, her mother, father, and brother. However, everything changed. Naomi suddenly stopped responding to calls and messages from her family. After several hours of trying to reach her, her parents became worried and contacted her brother. He called the company where Naomi worked. He asked the manager to check on her. The manager informed him that Naomi hadn't come to work that day and that she had been unable to reach her by phone either. Casey had talked to Naomi just before her shift, and she seemed fine. She wasn't sick, in a bad mood, or planning anything else. Plus, Naomi was a dedicated employee who valued her job and saw it as a career opportunity, so it seemed very strange that she would suddenly miss a workday without a valid reason or any notification. Naomi always planned her days off with management beforehand to prevent issues. If she'd been sick, she would have told her colleagues or contacted her manager and asked her brother for assistance. Since she did none of these things, her family worried something serious had happened. Casey drove around the route Naomi was supposed to take and spoke to colleagues and friends, but no one had seen her. He felt that something was wrong, so he immediately contacted law enforcement agencies with a statement about Naomi's disappearance. The police started their investigation right away. They began by interviewing Naomi's family. Casey said that the day before she disappeared, Naomi had gone on a date with a man she met on a dating app. He didn't know which app she used. The date was brief, and Naomi didn't like the man. She didn't plan to see him again, and Casey didn't think he was involved in her disappearance. Casey also mentioned that a few days earlier, Naomi had complained about abuse harassment at work. She reported it to her managers, who took care of the problem, and the person harassing her stopped. These clues were interesting to the detectives, and they were checked out. Both men had solid alibis for that morning and were ruled out as suspects. Investigators then studied Naomi's social media pages and dating site accounts, but found nothing suspicious. There were no meetings planned in the near future, no stalkers had been writing to her, and she did not have a boyfriend or problematic exes who might want to harm her. She had only recently returned to the city and hadn't yet acquired a wide circle of acquaintances. A local resident reported an abandoned car that had been parked for 3 days. Police found the car in a secluded industrial area, a few kilometers outside the city. The license plate confirmed it belonged to Naomi. However, the car was empty. Nothing of value was inside, and Naomi was nowhere to be seen. There was no note or any clue about where she might have gone. The car's location was also strange. As it was not along her normal route to work or home, it seemed someone had attempted to hide the car. The car was taken for examination, but investigators found no signs of a struggle, nor blood, fingerprints, DNA samples, or other evidence. It appeared everything had been thoroughly wiped clean. What had happened to Naomi remained a complete mystery. Given the situation, law enforcement asked the FBI for assistance. They hoped the FBI could find more evidence, possibly even identify the hooded man that other Walmart employees mentioned seeing. FBI agents then began reviewing footage from the many surveillance cameras in the Walmart parking lot. This was a long process because they had to carefully analyze hundreds of hours of video to help find Naomi quickly and get useful information. The FBI offered a $10,000 reward for credible tips that would lead to her safe return. Unfortunately, this didn't produce results right away, and they received several incorrect tips. The people of Fernley were very worried about Naomi, and they were especially scared by the idea that someone dangerous might be kidnapping young women in their town. 17 days after Naomi disappeared, the investigation took a significant turn. On the 29th of March, police received a tip that directed them to a remote area in the Churchill district, over 50 kilometers from Fernley, where Naomi was last seen. This location was sparsely populated and unfamiliar to Naomi, as she had no known connections there. The fact that the tip led investigators to this place was concerning. Detectives went to the area because a witness reported seeing a car matching the description of Naomi's vehicle there on the day she vanished. Police officers thoroughly searched the area and, after several hours, discovered a patch of disturbed earth. They found a shallow grave containing the naked body of 18-year-old Naomi Irian. A forensic examination confirmed that she had died from 2 gunshot wounds, one to the chest and one to the head. The examination also revealed she had been physically and assaulted, suffering numerous abrasions and bruises. The body was taken for an autopsy, and the tragic news was reported to Naomi's family. The hardest hit was Casey, her brother, who felt guilty for her death. Believing he couldn't save her from such a terrible fate, he expressed his sorrow on social media, posting several messages. His loved ones supported him, trying to comfort him. The Irian family immediately flew to the US to organize Naomi's funeral. Now, they sought justice. Unfortunately, the police couldn't provide any specific information yet. When the disappearance case was reclassified as a brutal murder investigation, the police and the FBI redoubled their efforts to find the perpetrator. By this time, they had reviewed most of the footage from the parking lot surveillance cameras and identified the man witnesses had described. The footage showed a stranger walking around the parking lot dressed in a gray, hooded sweatshirt, jeans, and dark shoes. He had been present since before 5 o'clock a.m., before Naomi's arrival, and appeared to be looking for something, possibly a victim, as he lingered aimlessly and seemed suspicious. At 5:24 a.m., he was spotted near Naomi's car. He watched her from a distance for several minutes before approaching the vehicle. According to the camera recordings, the attacker stood by the driver's side window for some time, exchanging a few words with Naomi. His hand remained in his pocket, and his sweatshirt was sticking out as if concealing a weapon, possibly to intimidate her into silence and prevent her from calling for help. Then, the stranger abruptly opened the door, and Naomi moved to the passenger side while he got behind the wheel. During the kidnapping, various cameras captured the perpetrator from multiple angles, allowing for a partial reconstruction of his appearance, a shaved head and a beard. Investigators believed Naomi's kidnapper was a man between 30 and 40 years old. Experts compiled a psychological profile suggesting he lived near the kidnapping site. None of Naomi's relatives recognized him. Investigators also tracked his vehicle. He had arrived at the parking lot in a pickup truck, and although the license plates were initially blurred, video cameras had recorded them. FBI agents worked to enhance the video quality and analyze the images. The license plate number of the pickup truck was determined to be owned by Troy Driver, 41. FBI agents discovered that Troy had been arrested by police in Churchill County just 4 days before Naomi's body was found. He had already been released, as there was insufficient evidence to link him to another crime. However, it was clear that the police had reason to be interested in him. Law enforcement officers focused on Troy's past, which revealed a history of violent crimes dating back to his childhood in California. At age 12, he was sentenced to community service for cruelty to animals and their murder. Just 2 years later, at 14, he encountered more legal trouble, committing several burglaries, stealing firearms, and robbing stores. Due to his age, he received a suspended sentence. However, only 10 months later, he was evicted from his home and placed in a state correctional facility for minors after attacking another teenager with a loaded firearm, presumably intending to rob him. The victim believed he was close to death. When questioned, Troy justified his behavior by saying it was easier to rob than to work. By age 15, Troy had begun drinking alcohol and using illegal substances, becoming increasingly aggressive. He was avoided by ordinary teenagers but associated with members of the criminal underworld. In April 1997, a turning point occurred when he escalated from petty crimes to armed robbery, becoming an accessory to murder. He used a firearm to shoot another man, whose body was dumped on a highway outside of town. The victim's car was stolen and later found burned. Despite carefully trying to conceal the evidence, Troy was quickly caught. He was charged with robbery, burglary, illegal possession and use of a firearm, accessory to murder, and concealment of evidence. He maintained his innocence on all counts, but was found guilty and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Troy was not known for exemplary behavior, but he was released on parole after 12 years and spent the following 2 years under supervision. During this period, he appeared to be on the path to reform. He began working legally, even attempting to start a family, but without success. By 2014, law enforcement had ceased close monitoring. Believing he no longer posed a threat to society, it remains unknown how many crimes Troy committed in the years leading up to 2022 without being caught. In 2022, he became a suspect in the murder of 18-year-old Naomi Irian. The crime appeared to be an act of unprovoked aggression. Troy did not know his victim, and according to witnesses, she had not provoked him in any way. Troy worked as an excavator driver and lived with his girlfriend in a small town in Nevada. Law enforcement officers interviewed her, and she was cooperative. She stated that Troy had gone hiking on the 11th of March and 12th and was absent during those days. While she initially took this calmly, as Troy enjoyed walks and active sports, she found it suspicious that he had left his mobile phone at home, suggesting he might have been trying to conceal illegal activities. She revealed that Troy had an unhealthy fascination with serial killers. He constantly read books and listened to podcasts about them in his free time. However, he didn't exhibit cruelty in his personal life, so she had no idea he was capable of such violence. Investigators discovered that, shortly before the attack on Naomi, Troy had spoken with the daughter of a friend who was also an employee of the company where Naomi worked. Troy had questioned her about the bus service that Panasonic used to transport its employees. He inquired about the route, stops, how long it waited for employees, departure times, and even the number of people on board when the bus was full. He claimed this interest stemmed from his desire to get a job there, but the true, frightening motive was later revealed. Investigators had irrefutable evidence that he committed this terrible crime. After forensic examination of Naomi's body, a DNA sample of the perpetrator was found, which matched Troy's profile. He had killed and abused her. The police immediately arrested him. Troy Driver was charged with murder, first-degree kidnapping, robbery, abuse, burglary of a motor vehicle, and concealing evidence. Troy pleaded not guilty to all charges. Bail was set at $750,000, but he could not afford it and was held in custody. A long trial ensued, in which Naomi's family participated. The reconstruction of events suggested that early in the morning, Troy was lurking in the Walmart parking lot with one goal: to kill. Naomi seemed like an ideal victim to him. She was sitting alone in her car, and no one else was around besides other people waiting in the parking lot. He likely believed that no one would notice him. When Troy approached Naomi's car, he immediately threatened her with a gun. She became frightened and moved to the passenger seat, allowing him to get behind the wheel. She did not call for help, perhaps hoping that the criminal only wanted valuables. He drove her car to a remote location in Churchill County, where he killed and abused her at gunpoint. He buried her in a shallow grave. Afterward, he drove her car to a prearranged location where his pickup truck was parked. He ditched Naomi's car and drove away in his pickup. He later changed the tires on his pickup truck to cover his tracks. The investigation revealed that the burial site had been prepared in advance, excavated about a month before Naomi's abduction. This indicated that Troy had been planning the murder for a long time. During his pre-trial detention, several significant events unfolded. On August 18, 2022, detectives received a letter of confession, purportedly written by Troy. He had initially sent it to his ex-girlfriend, who then passed it on to investigators. The note was never fully made public. However, based on shared excerpts, Troy expressed something akin to regret. He stated that he did not know Naomi, but considered her easy prey. He also admitted in the note that his actions were not abuse-motivated. This message was more than just an apology. 2 days later, Troy tried to end one's own life but survived. For the rest of 2022, he was moved between different prisons for psychiatric evaluations and was closely watched to prevent further suicide attempts. Even though he tried to harm himself, Troy was declared mentally competent and able to go to trial. On March 7, 2023, he attempted to end one's own life again. This time, by cutting himself again. The attempt failed. He cited the isolation in prison as the reason for his actions. In June 2023, he was discharged from the isolation ward and transferred to a maximum security prison, where he was to remain until the start of his hearing, scheduled for the end of 2023. On the 6th of August of that year, guards observed that Troy was behaving normally, going about his usual routine, and they noticed nothing unusual. During a routine inspection at 5:22 p.m., less than an hour before the next round at 6:17 p.m., Troy was found in his cell with no signs of life. Resuscitation effort failed, and Troy Driver was pronounced dead due to self-strangulation. This time, his attempt was successful. Following his death, the county sheriff held a press conference to express his condolences to the Irian family. He reiterated that they had irrefutable evidence against Troy and that his conviction at the end of the trial was inevitable. Regardless of the defense presented, the DNA evidence would have ensured he spent the rest of his life in prison. The sheriff emphasized that Troy's actions only confirmed that he was a cowardly and pathetic person. However, this offered little consolation to Naomi's relatives, who had wanted to look him in the eye during the trial and hear the judge's verdict. In any case, this dangerous man would no longer be able to harm anyone. On the 3rd of February, 2018, Alyssa Notseda, an 18-year-old from Everett, Washington, kissed her mum goodbye and headed out to a party. She packed a bag with extra clothes, a sign that she planned to stay over. The party was at a mobile home near Martha Lake, just a short drive from her home in Everett. Parties like this weren't unusual for Alyssa. She loved hanging out with friends, catching up. And just being 18, her mum, Gina Pearson, knew where she was going and trusted her to stay safe. But as the hours ticked by, something felt off. Alyssa was born on the 25th of August, 1999, in Everett, Washington, a working-class city about 25 miles north of Seattle. As the firstborn child of Gina, Alyssa grew up with a younger sister. Gina described Alyssa as outgoing, smart, and determined, a young woman with a vibrant personality who made friends easily. Alyssa attended Mariner High School in Everett, a public school known for its diverse student body, but like many teenagers, her path wasn't perfectly linear. Around 2016 or 2017, she took a break from high school for about a year. Instead of staying idle, she got a job at a pizza restaurant on Whidbey Island, a scenic spot across Puget Sound. From Everett, the job wasn't easy. She had to commute by ferry from Mukilteo, a trip that could take over an hour each way, depending on the schedule. It was a grind, but Alyssa stuck with it, showing her work ethic and independence. That job was more than just a paycheck for Alyssa. It was a step toward figuring out her future. According to her mum, Alyssa was proud of the responsibility and the chance to earn her own money. She'd always been close to her family, especially her little sister. Gina often spoke of Alyssa's determination, noting how she balanced work with her plans to return to school. In early 2018, Alyssa had started gathering paperwork to re-enroll at Mariner High School. Her goal was to graduate alongside her friends, a milestone she was excited to reach. Outside of work and school, Alyssa was a typical 18-year-old. She loved hanging out with friends, whether it was catching up over food or just chilling together. Everett was her home base, a place where she felt comfortable navigating the local scene. coffee shops, parks, and the occasional party, Alyssa wasn't perfect, but she had a drive to keep moving forward, whether it was through her job, her plans for school, or her relationships with family and friends. On the evening of the 3rd of February, 2018, Alyssa was getting ready to go out. Earlier that day, she told her mum, Gina, that she was going to a party at a mobile home in the 400 block of Lakeview Road near Martha Lake, only a few miles from home. This was just another weekend hangout, nothing out of the ordinary. She yelled out to her family, saying she loved them before heading out. As Gina later recalled, it was a small moment, but one she would always hold on to. Martha Lake is a quiet, suburban area in Linwood, about 15 miles north of Seattle. The mobile home park where the party took place was typical for the area, tightly packed homes and families, with young people living side by side. The party was at a residence within this neighborhood, a spot where local teens and young adults often gathered. Alyssa knew people there, felt comfortable enough to bring an overnight bag, and likely expected a night of music, conversation, and perhaps some drinks. Parties like this were common for her crowd friends catching up, some letting loose after a long week. Alyssa arrives at the trailer and joins a group of young people at a casual party. There was music, conversation, and banned substance. As the night wore on, something went wrong. The next morning, the 4th of February, she wasn't answering her phone, which was unusual for someone who typically stayed in touch with her mum. Gina later told reporters she had a bad feeling when Alyssa left that night but hadn't acted on it. Alyssa's friends, too, lost track of her. No one could say exactly when or why she stopped engaging with the group. By the 5th of February, Gina grew worried because she hadn't heard from Alyssa in almost 2 days. She posted on Facebook, urgently asking for help. Alyssa's silence was unusual and frightening. Her sister, mother, and friends were all worried about her whereabouts and well-being. The reason for her disappearance remained a mystery. Hidden in that mobile home near Martha Lake, friends who'd been at the party were questioned informally by Gina and others. But no one could pinpoint exactly when Alyssa was last seen. The lack of answers pushed Gina to contact the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office, turning her personal search into an official missing persons case. The police started investigating Alyssa's disappearance. Court documents show detectives interviewed party attendees to reconstruct Alyssa's timeline. Initially, the investigation was unclear because partygoers provided uncertain or contradictory information, and no one could confirm if Alyssa left the mobile home or remained there. The investigation took a critical turn when police received a tip. Court records show that someone who'd heard details about the party contacted authorities, raising concerns about what might have happened to Alyssa. The tip pointed detectives back to the mobile home, suggesting that the answers to Alyssa's disappearance were still inside. Then, an important information was reported. A man who introduced himself as Brian Varela's colleague said that Alyssa collapsed in Varela's bedroom during a party on the 3rd of February, 2018, after consuming prohibited substances. On February 8, 2018, the police returned to the residence with a warrant. What they found there changed the case from a missing persons report to something far more serious. Alyssa's body was discovered in the residence, hidden in a plastic crate in a bedroom. Brian Varela, 19, was arrested at his mobile home in the 400 block of Lakeview Road, Linwood. The discovery was shattering. The mobile home, once a casual party spot, was now a crime scene, and the investigation shifted from finding Alyssa to understanding how she died. Detectives began processing the scene meticulously. The Snohomish County Medical Examiner's Office was called in to determine the cause of death on the 17th of April, 2018. The medical examiner released their findings. Alyssa's death was ruled accidental, caused by an overdose from a combination of 2 illicit substances. The report didn't point to foul play in the overdose itself, But the circumstances surrounding her death raised serious questions. The evidence pointed to a tragic sequence of events. Alyssa had been at the party, socializing in a bedroom with others. When she consumed illicit substances, she collapsed shortly after. That night, Varela, instead of calling 911, he took semi-nude photos of her, texting them to friends with the message, "He thinks she dead, still breathing." He admitted to abusing her while she was unconscious. He searched online for what to do if someone overdoses, but ignored advice to seek help. By the morning of the 4th of February, Varela woke to find Alyssa dead, her lips blue and body cold. He showed her body to his co-worker, who urged him to call police, but Varela refused. Brian saying Alyssa died after being intimate with him and admitting that he was unsure if she was alive during the attack. Varela used Alyssa's thumb to unlock her iPhone, posting, "I'm out, bye," on her Snapchat to suggest she'd run away. He washed her body to remove DNA evidence, broke her leg to fit her into a plastic crate obtained from his mother's nearby home, and planned to bury her near Marysville with onions to mask the odor, intending to flee to Mexico. Brian's co-worker, after seeing Gina's Facebook post about Alyssa's disappearance, reported it to the police, leading to Brian Varela's arrest and Alyssa's body being discovered that same day during a search of the mobile home for Alyssa's family. The news of her death was unbearable. Gina, who had been searching tirelessly since Alyssa's disappearance, was devastated. Gina was 16 when she became pregnant with Alyssa, and there were parallels between Alyssa's youth and her own. She kind of saw what Alyssa went through. The judicial process unfolded in Snohomish County Superior Court on the 9th of February, 2018. Brian Varela was charged with first-degree manslaughter, second-degree abuse, and controlled substance homicide. With bail set at $500,000, court records highlight the prosecution's challenge. Washington law did not criminalize failing to seek help for an overdose unless the victim was a child, elderly, or pregnant, making first-degree manslaughter difficult to prove. Proving second-degree abuse was also difficult due to legal definitions surrounding consent and unconsciousness. On the 20th of September, 2018, Varela pleaded guilty to reduced charges in a plea deal: second-degree manslaughter, third-degree abuse, and unlawful disposal of remains. Amistemianor, deputy prosecutor, explained that the deal ensured a conviction, as a trial risked an acquittal on the original charges due to legal constraints. The sentencing hearing on the 15th of November, 2018, was emotional. Alyssa's family and friends filled the courtroom, many wearing Justice for Alyssa hoodies, some featuring her image and angel wings. Gina spoke tearfully, calling the plea deal a slap on the wrist. Brian's defense argued for leniency, citing his lack of a prior criminal record and his guilty plea as evidence of remorse. However, prosecutors pushed for the maximum sentence, with deputy prosecutor condemning Varela's complete disregard for Alyssa's life. Superior Court Judge Linda Crease expressed frustration, telling the court she was surprised, even outraged, that the maximum penalty for someone with no prior record was 34 months. She noted that even some auto thefts carry heavier sentences. On November 15, 2018, Judge Linda Crease sentenced Varela to 34 months in prison, the maximum allowed. The sentence marked the end of the legal proceedings, but for Alyssa's family, it fell far short of justice. Outside the courtroom, the community's reaction echoed the family's frustration. The friends and neighbors were stunned by the short sentence. Given the details of the case, Alyssa was remembered as a local girl who worked hard at a pizza restaurant on Whidbey Island and dreamed of a brighter future. The outcome sparked conversations about the dangers of prohibited substances and the need for legal reforms. Gina Pearson vowed to take action. She planned to push for changes in Washington's laws to hold people accountable for failing to seek help in overdose cases. Her advocacy was driven by a desire to prevent other families from experiencing the same heartbreak. This tragedy highlighted how quickly a night out could turn deadly. The 19th of March, 2016, 8:21 am. Surveillance footage captures 15-year-old Paige Doherty, neatly groomed, backpack over her shoulders, pushing open the glass door of a small store on a busy street in Clydebank, Scotland. She steps inside, the door slowly shuts behind her, and that's the last time anyone sees her. It was a normal Saturday morning, just like any other. But then, something happened that would deeply affect Paige's family, friends, and the whole town. What seemed familiar and safe, a local shop, its friendly owner, and a well-known street, became unsettling. Within a few hours, Paige's family knew something was wrong. Paige Doherty was born on April 17, 2000, in Clydebank, Scotland. Even as a young child, she was known for her kindness and maturity. She was always smiling, thoughtful, and friendly, making it easy for her to connect with people of all ages. Paige didn't seek the spotlight, but her presence was always noticed. As the oldest of 4 children, she naturally felt responsible for her siblings. Paige's mother, Pamela Doherty, and stepfather, Andrew, raised the family together. Their home was always lively, and despite facing challenges, the family shared a strong bond of love and closeness. Paige deeply loved her younger siblings. She wasn't simply responsible for them, she genuinely cared about them. She had a particularly strong bond with her younger brother, Andy, who had special needs. Paige frequently took him to the park or the cinema. These outings were important and rewarding for both of them. Paige knew from a young age that she wanted to be a hairstylist and beauty expert. She was fascinated by fashion and personal style, enjoying makeup, hairstyling, and keeping up with the latest trends. By the time she was 15, her goals were clear. When a local salon offered her a Saturday job, she embraced the opportunity, seeing it as the start of her career, not just a part-time job. Her colleagues found her to be punctual, respectful, and always ready to learn. Paige enjoyed a lively social life, often sharing photos and showcasing her beauty skills on social media. While she had many acquaintances, her best friend was Lauren. They were very close, enjoying sleepovers, deep conversations, sharing secrets, and making plans for the future. Paige also had a boyfriend named Dylan, and their relationship, though new, was meaningful. They communicated constantly, texting and calling each other daily, openly shared their thoughts, feelings. Paige trusted Dylan and felt he genuinely cared about her. They both found it difficult to be apart. Even for a single day, Paige lived a simple yet meaningful life. Although she had big dreams, she never wanted to leave her hometown. She didn't see success as escaping her roots. Instead, she wanted to build a fulfilling life in the place where she grew up. Her actions proved this. She worked hard, learned continuously, helped people, and showed compassion, which is what she truly desires. In the Clydebank community, at first glance, John Leatham seemed like a typical member of the stable and respected middle class. At 32 years old, he was a local business owner, married and raising a young daughter. His wife, Kaja, was originally from Poland. From the outside, their life looked quiet and comfortable. A modest home near his workplace, a steady routine, caring for their daughter, going for walks. It all gave off an image of reliability. John was known in the neighborhood as a polite and composed man. He owned Delicious Deli, a small store that combined a corner store, mini cafe, and deli counter. Its location on a busy street near homes and a bus stop made it popular with locals, students, and workers. John often served customers himself. Chatting with many, he recognized He was friendly, rarely showing irritation, and never being disrespectful. Regular customers didn't suspect anything unusual about him. He seemed quiet, neat, and a bit reserved, but not in a worrying way. Delicious Deli had a good reputation. It was clean, well-stocked, and reliably open. Behind John's image as a reliable family man was a hidden truth. He had a twin brother named George. Few people knew about George, and unlike John, George had a criminal record. In 2003, at 19 years old, George was convicted of a serious crime. He ambushed a woman, dragged her into the bushes, and assaulted her. He received a suspended sentence of 3 years, was ordered to do community service, and had to register as an abuse offender. Years later, George's behavior hadn't changed. In 2016, just before a court hearing, he caused another incident. He appeared drunk near a gas station, carrying a knife and metal batons, threatened people. He was soon arrested again. In 2019, he assaulted his pregnant wife at home while intoxicated, causing her serious injuries. He was then sentenced to 9 months in prison. Unlike his brother George, John had no criminal record, allowing him to cultivate a perfect public image as a calm and reliable businessman. But as investigators investigated the current case, they discovered a hidden side of John, a man capable of sudden, uncontrollable aggression. This discovery placed the Latham family under intense public scrutiny. John's wife had never suspected anything was wrong. However, the image of John as a family man and shop owner was just a facade. The Latham family had a complex and disturbing history that few understood. The contrast between John's calm exterior and hidden tension ultimately led to a tragic event that shocked Clydebank. On the evening of March 18, 2016, Paige Doherty had a sleepover at her best friend Lauren's house. Because she had to work early the next morning, she set her alarm to wake up in time to catch her bus. The next morning, March 19, Paige woke up on time. She said goodbye to Lauren and left to walk to the bus stop. She normally stopped at Ashy's store, where she'd known him since childhood, to buy a sandwich or drink before work. However, this day was different. She waved to Ashy as she passed his store, but didn't go in. Instead, she continued down the street to John Latham's store, just a short distance away. At 8:21 am, surveillance footage showed Paige entering John's deli. That was the last time anyone saw her. She vanished without a trace. When Paige didn't show up at the salon for her shift, alarm bells rang immediately. Her co-workers knew she took her responsibilities seriously. She never ran late or missed a shift without notice. The team at the salon tried calling her but couldn't get through. Her phone was turned off. They contacted her mother, Pamela, to let her know. Worry quickly turned into fear. Pamela is unable to contact Paige, which is completely out of character for her. Paige always replied to texts and calls, especially from those closest to her. At the same time, her boyfriend Dylan was also trying to reach her. None of his messages had been read. Growing increasingly concerned, he called the salon to check if she'd arrived. When he found out that Paige hadn't shown up and no one had heard from her, his concern turned into panic. Dylan and Pamela both began checking Paige's social media accounts. She was always active online, posting updates, replying to friends, and sharing photos. But that day, there was nothing. No updates, no posts, no replies. The silence online only deepened their fear. This has never happened before. Hours went by. Still, no word. It became clear that this wasn't just a case of running late or a minor misunderstanding. Her family and friends knew by then that something serious had happened. Pamela contacted law enforcement right away. Given the circumstances and everything they knew about Paige, authorities treated the situation as a high-risk disappearance from the start. The first phase of the search began family, friends, salon co-workers, and even neighbors joined efforts, calling everyone they knew, printing flyers, and looking for any possible clue. But at this stage, not a single lead came through. Paige had vanished in a matter of minutes. No one could have known that a simple decision to stop by a corner deli would turn out to be life-altering. Meanwhile, law enforcement worked in parallel, conducting interviews. They mapped out Paige's likely path from Lauren's house to the bus stop and tried to determine who might have seen her that morning. Shop owners along the way were questioned, and surveillance footage from nearby businesses was reviewed. Any deviation from her usual route drew attention. A day passed, but there was still no new information. The lack of witnesses, signs, or physical evidence only made the situation more tense. The only solid window investigators had was that brief period when Paige was walking down the street and entered one of the stores. The search for Paige Doherty continued for 2 full days. Her family, volunteers, and the police never gave up hope of finding her alive. However, on the morning of the 21st of March, 2016, that hope was shattered. Her body was discovered by 2 passers-by, walking along an overgrown roadside area about a mile from the bus stop she had been heading toward that Saturday morning. The location was difficult to access due to the thick brush and infrequent travel, which explained why her body hadn't been found sooner. The 2 passers-by spotted a suspicious-looking black bag on the ground. Upon closer inspection, they realized there was a body inside. Law enforcement arrived quickly and secured the area. Even during the initial inspection, it was clear the girl had died from multiple knife wounds. Later findings would reveal just how brutal the attack had been. Forensic examiners counted 146 sharp force injuries on Paige's body, 61 of which were direct stab wounds. The remaining injuries were consistent with defensive wounds sustained during a struggle. Her arms and forearms showed the heaviest damage, proof that Paige fought back with everything she had. She was barely 5 feet tall, but she fought for her life. Some of the injuries to her head and neck were especially targeted and repetitive. One deep slash to the neck had severed the carotid artery, causing massive bleeding. According to experts, this was the fatal wound. The level of aggression involved in the crime left no doubt that this wasn't a random act or a robbery gone wrong. It was deeply personal and emotionally charged. The investigators quickly determined that this was not a random attack. The extreme violence, the specific wounds, and the force used suggested the attacker knew Paige. The crime was committed with intense rage, a common element in crimes motivated by personal reasons. The location where Paige's body was found was also suspicious. It was hidden from the road, requiring effort to reach, which indicated premeditation. The person responsible either knew the area or had planned the location in advance to conceal the crime. The way the body was wrapped and placed suggested it had been moved to that location after Paige died. News of Paige's body being found spread quickly. It was a terrible shock for all those who had been searching for her. Paige's family was informed, and her mother, Pamela, found it hard to believe. Dylan and Lauren was completely stunned. The volunteers who had helped by putting up posters and sharing information online now posted messages of sadness and support. The whole community mourned her loss. Meanwhile, police are still actively analyzing surveillance footage and speaking to anyone who may have seen Paige on the day she disappeared. Their goal is to retrace her final steps and identify the last person to see her. It became clear that this crime had either been planned or carried out by someone who was sure they could erase all traces. But in a town where nearly every corner store and intersection had surveillance, disappearing entirely was almost impossible. Detectives requested footage from all surveillance cameras along her usual route from Lauren's home to the bus stop. Two locations stood out: Fleming Food Store, where she typically grabbed breakfast, and the neighboring deli, Delicious Deli, where she had stopped that morning. The breakthrough came after Ashi, owner of Fleming Food Store, called the police. He remembered seeing Paige that morning. She waved at him but didn't come into the store, which struck him as unusual. Remembering that his security system had a wide-angle view, he reviewed the footage. The footage clearly shows Paige walking down the street and entering the Delicious Deli store next door. However, the footage did not capture her leaving. Ashi immediately shared the video with the police. Investigators studied the footage closely and found that at 8:21 a.m., Paige walked into Delicious Deli. For more than an hour afterward, no one was seen exiting. Then, at 9:58 the cameras captured John Leatham locking up the shop, pulling down the shutters, and leaving in a hurry. He crossed the street to another store where he purchased disinfectant, bleach, and heavy-duty trash bags. This was confirmed by both surveillance footage and the store clerk, who noted how anxious the customer appeared. At 10:03 a.m., the cameras caught John again, returning to the deli with his purchases. Not long after, he emerged, carrying a large black bag, from which the footage clearly showed a foot in a white sock sticking out. Investigators now realized they were witnessing what looked like an attempt to dispose of a body, but this was only one part of a disturbing sequence of events caught on tape. Instead of driving away, John returned to the store multiple times over the next 2 hours, going in and out repeatedly. During that time, he tried to clean the space, scrub away blood, and get rid of evidence. Cameras captured his movements, facial expressions, and gestures. He appeared frantic and disoriented. At one point, he even changed clothes and casually reopened the deli to serve customers as if nothing had happened. A police unit was dispatched immediately to make the arrest. Within 10 hours of receiving the footage, investigators had enough evidence to take him into custody. John Leatham was arrested and brought in for questioning. Meanwhile, forensic experts thoroughly investigated his shop. It seemed clean initially, but after moving refrigerators and display cases, they discovered bloodstains under the shelves. Tests proved the blood was Paige Doherty's. This new evidence consistently made John's situation worse. While arresting John, investigators kept collecting evidence. They examined his car and discovered blood, even though someone had clearly tried to clean it. Forensic analysis of the area where Paige's body was found confirmed that John's car was there the day he dumped the body. At this stage, his guilt was certain. Surveillance footage had become the key piece of evidence. It showed who last saw Paige, how the suspect behaved, and the step-by-step effort he made to cover his tracks. After his arrest, John Leatham initially denied everything. He claimed he didn't know Paige and insisted she had never entered his store, but police already had hard evidence: security footage, blood samples from the floor and his car, and the unmistakable image of a body in a trash bag. Faced with this overwhelming proof, John Leatham changed his story and confessed to the crime. He claimed it all happened in a panic. According to him, Paige entered the store, placed an order, and asked if he was hiring. He asked her age, and when she said 15, he declined. He then alleged that Paige threatened to accuse him of inappropriate behavior if he didn't give her the job. He claimed he panicked, fearing he'd be falsely accused, haunted by his brother's criminal history, and grabbed a knife. John described the moment as a sudden conflict. He claimed Paige started yelling, and he struck her in an attempt to make her stop. When he realized she was no longer alive, he wrapped her body, hid it in a storage area, and went home. There, he hid the body in a shed, changed clothes, and the next day took his family on a weekend trip to Balmaha as if nothing had happened. 2 days later, he returned and left the body in a brush-covered area by the roadside. Investigators scrutinized his version of events carefully. First, there was no support for the claim of blackmail. Paige had no history of aggression or manipulative behavior. Her mother, friends, and co-workers all described her as kind, gentle, and respectful. She already had a job at a salon she loved. There was no reason for her to be seeking work elsewhere. Forensics also revealed the attack was not a quick outburst. It involved a prolonged struggle and numerous injuries, ruling out the idea of a momentary lapse. There was no evidence of intimate violence or any personal connection between Paige and John. This made his motive even harder to understand. He maintained that he had no intent to harm and acted in response to what he saw as a threat. But the nature of the attack, 146 sharp force injuries, many targeting the neck and face, left no doubt about the level of brutality. Details of the case began to appear in the media. The public reacted with disbelief to John's explanation. One aspect that drew particular outrage was what he did after the crime, taking his family on a trip, supposedly to clear his mind. In light of the evidence, John Leatham was formally charged with the crime. His confession, paired with far-fetched justifications, failed to earn sympathy from either investigators or the public. From the very beginning, it was clear this was not a momentary lapse, but a deliberate attempt to cover up a serious offense. And although authorities never identified a precise motive behind the act, the scale and brutality of the attack spoke volumes. As soon as John's name became known to the public, attention quickly turned not just to him, but to those around him. In particular, people began focusing on his twin brother, George. George's criminal history became widely known only after the case surrounding Paige's death was revealed. Psychological evaluations showed the brothers had different levels of self-control, but both tended to avoid taking responsibility and to misrepresent facts. John had always seemed like a respectable person, while George had frequently been in trouble with the police. Journalists, bloggers, and Clydebank residents became increasingly interested in the Leatham family. People started investigating the brothers' backgrounds, comparing them and guessing what caused their aggressive behavior. Some people believed the family had a history of suppressed anger, even if it wasn't obvious. On September 5, 2016, John Leatham's trial began at the High Court in Glasgow. The trial was a major public event. Paige's family, along with reporters, activists, and concerned Clydebank residents, filled the courtroom, all seeking answers. Pamela, Paige's mother, testified first. She explained that their lives had been changed forever since Paige went missing. She spoke of sleepless nights, haunted by the fear of imagining she heard Paige's voice, and of the constant emptiness and pain. Most heartbreakingly, she described how difficult it was to watch her other children struggle to understand that their sister would never be coming home. Andrew, Paige's stepfather, also spoke to the court, explaining how devastated he was by the tragedy. He said it had made it impossible for him to manage everyday life. He became especially emotional when talking about their son, Andy, who has developmental disabilities. Andy didn't understand why Paige, the sister he used to spend time with, was gone. Andrew said Andy repeatedly asked when Paige was coming home, and the family had to avoid giving him a straight answer. His statement deeply affected everyone in the courtroom. Investigators presented strong evidence, security videos, forensic analysis, witness statements, and John's own admission. His lawyers admitted he killed Paige, but claimed it was a panicked, unplanned act. On October 12, 2016, 7 months after Paige Doherty's murder, John Leatham was sentenced, with Judge Lady Ray setting a minimum prison term of 27 years before he would be eligible for parole. For Paige's family, this was seen as a step toward justice. As her mother stated, it wouldn't bring Paige back, but it ensured that her killer wouldn't be free anytime soon. The court emphasized the brutality of the crime and John's efforts to conceal it, dismissing any suggestion of an emotional breakdown or moment of panic. Despite the overwhelming evidence and public reaction, John's defense team filed an appeal, arguing that the sentence was too harsh. Their claim rested on the facts that John had no prior criminal record, had a family, including a young daughter. They insisted the crime was not premeditated and that John had shown remorse. Therefore, they argued, he deserved a reduced sentence. This sparked outrage across Clydebank, especially among Page's family and friends. Nevertheless, the appeals court reviewed the case and reduced the minimum term from 27 to 23 years. The judge cited a lack of evidence for pre-planning and the fact that he had confessed. This decision triggered a strong backlash from the public. For many, it felt like rewarding a criminal. Page's relatives publicly stated that they considered the reduction an insult, not just to them, but to Page's memory. John's actions after the crime, cleaning up, hiding the body, and pretending everything was normal at work, showed a lack of remorse. During the hearings, John remained calm and avoided any interaction with Page's family. His cold, emotionless demeanor implied he didn't connect with the gravity of his actions. His failure to apologize or express sympathy to Page's family or her loved ones reinforced the argument against reducing his sentence. The final ruling left a bitter taste. On one hand, the offender was behind bars. On the other, knowing that he could be released in just over 2 decades sparked discomfort for many. But the most important outcome was that the crime received a formal legal judgment, and Page's family had the opportunity to speak publicly and share the pain they had endured. The court answered the question of who, but the question of why remained unanswered. The Leatham family faced public condemnation. So, authorities arranged protection for John's wife after she became a target of verbal and physical attacks during prison visits. She was harassed and assaulted until she eventually fled to Poland with her daughter. John's brother, George, continued to engage in criminal behavior, threatening people with weapons and physically assaulting his wife. The family's darker history began to surface. After the violent loss of her daughter Paige, Pamela started a foundation to help families experiencing similar tragedies. Later, Pamela had another daughter. Although the family never fully recovered from their grief, they tried to move on. The town of Clydebank remembers Paige through memorial walks, where participants wear pink and release balloons. Her funeral was well attended, and her casket was carried in a horse-drawn carriage. On what would have been her birthday, friends organized a party in her memory, a celebration she never had the chance to enjoy. Paige is remembered not only as a victim, but as a symbol of remembrance and a stark reminder of the impact of senseless violence. On July 15, 2015, a group of travelers stopped near the town of Winaka, South Australia. They were on their way to Adelaide and pulled over at a roadside rest area. While some wanted to use the restroom or simply stretch their legs, they noticed an old, tattered suitcase some distance from the designated parking spots. It appeared to have been there for quite some time. Though hesitant to pry, the sight of children's clothes peeking through a tear in the bag ultimately overwhelmed their hesitation. One of the travelers nudged the suitcase with their foot. Then, an even more peculiar sight emerged from beneath the fabric, a white object resembling a bone. The group debated whether the suitcase had simply fallen off a passing vehicle containing discarded items. They decided not to investigate further and continued their journey to Adelaide. However, the nagging feeling that they might have stumbled upon human remains stayed with them. Later, one of the women in the group contacted the police and reported their discovery. When police arrived at the rest area, they easily located the suitcase and inside, the skeleton of a small child. Disturbingly, there was tape on the skull, presumably covering the mouth, and a diaper placed over it. This suggested a possible attempt to suffocate or strangle the child before death. From the outset, law enforcement was cautious about releasing information to the public, wanting to avoid causing panic and being misled by false leads, at least until they could identify the body. The suitcase contained, in addition to the complete skeleton, several items seemingly belonging to a young child: dresses, t-shirts, and other children's clothing. Notably, there was also a pair of men's boxer shorts and a small, hand-sewn patchwork quilt. Often a gift from a loved one, light-colored hair was also found, which provided some initial clues for the investigation. Investigators first checked all regional missing children reports, but found no matches. Every item in the suitcase was carefully examined, yet yielded no identifying information, not even a name. It was also unclear how long the suitcase had been at the rest area. Forensic experts established a temporary base at the site, meticulously examining the surrounding area where the remains were found. Meanwhile, a forensic pathologist confirmed that the remains were those of a girl, likely between 2 and 4 years old. According to the expert, the remains could have been there for several years. The lack of any missing person report for the child over so many years was perplexing. The police interviewed road crews and local residents who frequented the area, hoping someone might have noticed the suitcase before. They theorized that it might have been moved to the rest area after being in another location for an extended period. Some local residents reported noticing a strange suitcase with children's clothes sticking out, but none had looked closely to see what was inside. A thorough forensic analysis of the isolated location confirmed that the suitcase had been there for a considerable amount of time, simply overlooked. One theory was that it had been lying to the side and had been dragged around by wild animals. Still, no information was found about the child's identity. To solve the mystery, South Australian detectives launched one of the largest investigations in the state's history. The town near the suitcase's discovery was a small farming community. The police gathered all available evidence, the girl's belongings and information about her hair color, and went door to door, showing the items to every local resident, hoping someone would recognize them. When no one could provide any information, they concluded that the child likely hadn't lived in the immediate area before her death. The search area was then expanded, and detectives began focusing on neighboring towns, paying particular attention to kindergartens and medical facilities. A large list of missing children was compiled, but a thorough check revealed no matches. After that, they tried to catalog the items found in the suitcase and checked if they bore any unique brands, hoping to trace the purchase, but this yielded no results. The girl wore completely ordinary clothing. After all, the only clue left was the handmade blanket. It looked like the kind of item a loving grandmother often gifts to her granddaughter. Finally, they decided to appeal to the public through the media, showing photos of the blanket, the other items, and the suitcase itself. Following the media appeal, tips started coming in from the public. One local resident recalled noticing a well-dressed man walking along the side of the road with a suitcase in his hands. However, the witness had difficulty describing the stranger or providing an approximate date. Checking other leads also yielded no results. Weeks turned into months of fruitless searching. By this point, journalists had dubbed the nameless girl the suitcase baby. The situation shifted in early October 2015 when the police station received another tip. Report number 1267. The number reflected the seemingly hopeless nature of the case. Few believed that another random call could radically change the course of the investigation. The caller was a woman identified herself as a long-time family friend of Carly Pierce Stevenson. According to her, Carly had grown up in Northern Australia, a 20-year-old single mother from Alice Springs. She said she had once been very close to Carly and her daughter, Candalyse Pierce. Both had disappeared many years earlier under suspicious circumstances in 2009. The prevailing belief was that Carly had simply abandoned her family and left with the child. When the friend saw the blanket and clothes on the news, she immediately recognized them. After the report, investigators spoke to Carly's stepfather. He also recognized all of the items. Her mother, Colleen, was abandoned by her father while pregnant. Carly lived with Colleen her whole life, and Colleen later remarried. Carly had a close relationship with her mother and stepfather, but never knew her biological father. She was known as good-natured, bright, and independent. Carly began working almost immediately after Candace was born, and Colleen helped her with childcare. About a year before her disappearance, Carly met a young man. They began dating and then moved in together. Almost immediately, those close to her noticed that Carly became somewhat distant and communicated with her loved ones less frequently. Just a month before she disappeared, she announced that she wanted to break up with this boyfriend. Then, she suddenly announced that she was planning a trip around Australia to show her daughter the country. Although this decision seemed somewhat impulsive, it was consistent with Carly's free-spirited nature, so no one suspected anything amiss. Shortly before leaving, she told her family that she wasn't going to travel alone, but with a man named Daniel James Holdham. Colleen received limited information about Daniel. She knew that this man was 10 or even 15 years older than her daughter, and that they had been friends for some time. When Colleen met Daniel, she immediately noticed his strange behavior. Daniel avoided direct eye contact, kept his eyes downcast, and barely communicated, limiting himself to a few words in conversation. He was aloof, even a little unsettling. Colleen tried to dissuade her daughter from traveling with him, but Carly was adamant. After that, Colleen insisted that Carly at least leave Candace with her during this trip, but this request was denied. In November 2008, Carly and Candace moved away from Alice Springs. Initially, Carly contacted her family daily, but the calls gradually decreased. Eventually, she only sent occasional messages. By Christmas that year, Colleen had not heard from Carly in a long time. Colleen was especially worried because Carly always contacted her for Christmas, her favorite holiday. Colleen, fearing something terrible had happened to Carly and Candace, the following day, Carly texted Colleen again, but appeared focused solely on getting money. It was odd that Carly never called, only texted, but her family didn't find this suspicious. When detectives heard the story, they initially focused on confirming the girl's identity, setting aside Carly for the time being. Carly's friend assisted them in this process. A few days later, she came to the station and presented several photographs showing Candace wearing the same clothes found in the suitcase. One photo depicted the girl sitting in a stroller with a similar handmade patchwork blanket draped over her lap. Candace's grandmother had sewn the blanket based on DNA extracted from the girl's toothbrush. A DNA profile was created, and it matched the material found in the suitcase. Police finally confirmed that they had found the body of 2-year-old Candace. Closer examination revealed that Colleen's mother had briefly filed a police report in 2009, but she later withdrew it. Despite the disappearance of Carly and Candace, some of their digital activity continued for years afterward. This included not only text messages, but also financial transactions. Money continued to be withdrawn from the card. The activity only stopped after Colleen's death. Detectives are now focused on finding the child's mother, Carly. It was unclear if Carly had met the same fate as her daughter. On August 29, 2010, almost 5 years before the suitcase containing the body was found, a group of cyclists were exploring a remote area of the Belanglo State Forest, a very isolated area in New South Wales. The area is infamous for being the dumping ground of serial killer Ivan Milat, who left the bodies of his victims there in the 1982nd and 1992nd. The group inadvertently got lost in a dense part of the forest. There, a bone caught their attention. Assuming it belonged to an animal, Given its location deep in the forest, they initially dismissed it. However, Belanglo's notoriety made them consider that it might be human. The group initially drove away, convincing themselves it was a dead kangaroo. But after a few hours, having explored other areas, they returned to the site. This time, they found a human skull a few meters from the first bone. The cyclists immediately contacted law enforcement. Given Belanglo's history and the frequent false reports of bone discoveries, the detectives asked for a photograph. The group had to return to the site again to take a picture of the skull. After receiving the photo, the police confirmed that it was not a prank, but a genuine human skull. Law enforcement officers were dispatched to the site. After a thorough examination of the area, most of the bones were recovered. Investigators concluded that they belonged to a woman who had died under violent circumstances. She had sustained multiple injuries, including a fractured sternum and spine, consistent with a severe attack. The rib cage had been crushed, likely by a heavy object or stomping. The remains were scattered over a wide area, indicating that they had been there for a long time. Police searched for clues to identify the victim, initially suspecting she might have been one of Ivan Milat's victims. They found a t-shirt, a silver earring, and a white sock. The only thing they established was that the t-shirt was manufactured in Australia between 2003 and 2006. This ruled out the serial killer because he had already been arrested back in 1996. After almost a year of fruitless searching, the New South Wales Police decided to consult a renowned anthropologist and archaeologist. Up until that point, she had rarely been approached by law enforcement, but this time she seemed to be the only way to identify the deceased. The woman was tasked with reconstructing the victim's appearance based on the skull. The resulting portrait was distributed throughout the country, hoping someone would recognize the deceased. Even with the reconstruction, no information surfaced. By this point, only the approximate time of death has been determined. In 2009, a controlled burn was conducted in the forest area. Traces of burning on the bones suggested that the remains were already present before the fire. This narrowed the time frame of the woman's disappearance to between 2003 and 2009. Despite this, the victim remained unidentified for the next 5 years. The media dubbed the girl the Angel of Belanglo because the word angel was written on her t-shirt. However, forensic scientists managed to extract a complete DNA profile of the victim from the body and the evidence found. For 5 years, they regularly compared it with national and even international missing persons databases. After confirming the identity of Candice's remains, the investigators are still actively searching for information about Carly. The case involved 2 deceased individuals found almost 1,000 kilometers apart. However, DNA profiles showed a match. The investigators are still actively searching for information from Carly's friend, who said that a week after the trip began, Carly had called her very upset. Carly said she had made a big mistake by going on the trip and wanted to return home. Unfortunately, Carly provided no details and then suddenly stopped communicating, with only text messages continuing. For a while, Carly's mother received photos of her daughter and granddaughter, who appeared happy and healthy. However, by September 2009, all such messages ceased. Colleen worried that her daughter was trying to distance herself during this period. A missing persons report was filed, but because communication with Carly continued via text, Colleen withdrew the report, believing she was okay. Detectives now believe that Carly and Candice were likely already dead at this point. During this trip, Carly was stopped for a traffic violation on November 8, 2008, on the highway near Coober Pedy, and again in early December 2008 in the suburb of Canberra. It is believed that Carly was murdered on December 15, 2008, and then the girl was killed within a month. However, between 2009 and 2012, Someone continued to use Carly's phone, bank cards, and even benefits in her name. It was obvious that someone was trying to exploit the deceased's identity for personal gain. Police found that from the end of 2008 to 2012, more than $90,000 had been withdrawn from Carly's bank account. Throughout that time, her mother, Colleen, continued to send her money, about $500 at a time, in the hope that she was traveling and needed the money and would soon return home. The longer detectives tracked Carly's activities after leaving town, the more frequently the name Daniel James Hold'em surfaced. As it turned out, he had a long history of violence against women, even complaints of child harassment. Prior to meeting Carly, Daniel was well known to law enforcement. They were unable to locate Daniel quickly, but they found his cousin. The man said that Carly, Candelais, and Daniel had visited him for a few days. He recalled that Carly and Daniel seemed to be dating, but they had a conflict, apparently over money. Daniel believed that Carly should pay for some of his expenses, and she objected strongly. After the conflict, in the middle of the night, he said that they went for a drive to cool off. He was gone for a few hours, and when he returned, Carly was no longer with him. According to Daniel, during the drive, Carly had simply asked to be dropped off at a hotel, said she was leaving and returning her home. Daniel said he was then going to take Candelais to her mother before continuing the journey alone. The strange thing is, Daniel's cousin lived near Belanglo State Forest. Carly and Candelais disappeared after meeting with him. This made Daniel the main suspect. Investigators checked Daniel's phone records. Even though Daniel said he dropped Carly off at the hotel, her phone was still active and near Daniel's location. The investigation then tried to prove Daniel took money from Carly's bank account. Suddenly, a woman appeared. It turned out that she had been impersonating Carly in real life. She had communicated with bank employees and social service workers when they requested benefits. Detectives then focused on finding the woman who had pretended to be Carly. She was later identified as Hazel Passmore. It emerged that Hazel had been dating Daniel before Carly's trip. They had met several years before Carly and her daughter disappeared, and he had offered Hazel a trip to Australia. She accepted, bringing her 3 children with her. 2 of them were from a previous relationship, but Daniel claimed that the 3rd was his. The trip initially went well. Eventually, they decided to settle in Alice Springs, where Hazel hoped to find stable employment. After some time, they met Carly. Daniel was deeply involved in criminal activity, selling illegal substances, and making frequent 15-hour trips to Adelaide several times a month. He would collect large quantities of illegal substances, bring them back, and sell them. During one of these trips in 2008, he took Hazel and her 3 children during a night drive to avoid a kangaroo. Daniel swerved and the car flipped. Hazel's 2 older children were thrown from the car and killed. Hazel lost a leg and became partially paralyzed. While Hazel was recovering in the hospital, Daniel visited her with Carly and Candelais. Just one day later, in mid-December 2008, Daniel left on a trip with Carly, his new girlfriend, leaving the traumatized and heartbroken Hazel behind. Hazel sued him for damages for the accident that left her in a wheelchair. This all happened in December. When she told Daniel about the lawsuit, he suddenly said that he had made a big mistake and would return to her for Christmas. He did arrive with gifts just a few days after the murder. When detectives contacted Hazel and informed her of Carly and Candelais's deaths, she denied any knowledge of their fate. She also claimed that she had not been dating Daniel for about 3 years. However, when pressed, she admitted that she had helped her ex-boyfriend gain access to Carly's accounts. She had also sent messages to the victims' relatives, posing as Carly. Hazel insisted she didn't know what had happened to them. Thinking Daniel had simply stolen her cards, the situation changed when she was threatened with jail time for fraud. Hazel then revealed that she had accidentally seen an image of a dead woman on the forest floor on Daniel's phone. During a confrontation, Daniel confessed to killing both Carly and Candalyce. During a committal hearing in August 2017, Daniel allegedly told a witness that he had stomped on Carly Pierce Stevenson's throat, crushed her windpipe, and buried her body in the Belanglo forest, then crushed Candalyce's windpipe with his foot and stepped on her chest, breaking her ribs. He did not kill Candalyce immediately, but drove with her for several days between cities, pretending to be her father. Then, in a motel, he wrapped Candalyce's face with tape and put a diaper over Candalyce's head to suffocate her. When Candalyce died, he hid. Her body was stuffed into a suitcase and dumped in Winaka, where it remained for nearly 7 years. Meanwhile, instead of going to the police, Hazel became an active participant, continuing to impersonate Carly to collect benefits. Hazel, her only surviving child, and Daniel continued to travel, staying in various motels. The entire group lived off the allowances and funds transferred by Carly's mother. Hazel now claimed that she only participated out of fear that Daniel would harm her. This seemed implausible, since they hadn't even seen each other for the past 3 years. During that time, she could easily have gone to the police. When the local community learned the details of the case, they demanded that Hazel be held accountable as an accomplice. However, she provided all of this information to the police in exchange for leniency. Most significantly, she revealed that she had stolen a flash drive containing images of the deceased Carly from Daniel's phone and given it to her sister for safekeeping. Investigators were able to retrieve the flash drive and verify its contents, which proved to be damning evidence against Daniel. He was arrested in October 2015 for the double murder and a long list of other crimes. In June 2018, Daniel Holdom pleaded guilty, avoiding a jury trial. Bruce Pierce Stevenson's father and grandfather made a written statement during the sentencing hearing, expressing his desire for the death penalty for Daniel Holdom. However, New South Wales abolished the death penalty for murder in 1955. Prosecutor Mark Tedeschi described the murders as horrific murders, saying that both murders are of the worst kind and can rightly be described as heinous, abhorrent, hateful, gravely reprehensible, and extremely wicked. On 30 November 2018, Holdom was sentenced by the NSW Supreme Court to 2 consecutive life terms without parole for murder. The criminal's motive remains a mystery. The prosecutor believed the murders were thrill-seeking and motivated by several factors, including gaining access to baby Candalyce, toward whom he had previously shown abuse interest, and financial gain in the form of benefits and transfers from her mother. Due to the poor condition of the girl's remains, the abuse theory could not be confirmed. Investigators believed that Daniel may have committed many more crimes, but the investigation in this direction yielded no results. Daniel revealed some details of his abusive childhood, which might shed light on his history of violence against women. According to Daniel, he had a terrible childhood with a relative who regularly beat him, deprived him of food, forced him to drink vodka, locked him up, and even poured boiling water on him. He tried to escape several times, but the police returned the teenager. Against this backdrop, he began taking illegal banned substance from the age of 11. Later, he attempted to end one's own life 3 times. Despite the triumph of justice, this was a deeply tragic case. Carly and Candalyce's mother and grandmother did not live to see this moment. Both died before the remains were found and identified. After all these events, the handmade blanket found in the bag with the baby's bones was given to the Pierce family. Carly and her daughter, Candalyce, were buried in the town of Alice Springs, Australia.